"Put on your seatbelt," snarls Ted Bundy to an 18-year-old who's just gotten into his Volkswagen Beetle after making the mortally serious mistake of believing he's a cop. Something is not right. He stinks of booze. Minutes later, he stops the car. "What are you doing?" she asks, now petrified. "This isn't the police station." He offers no response. He doesn't even look at her. The most evil man in America is about to have the fight of his life. Day 1, 1961. A teenage girl in Ted's neighborhood in Tacoma, Washington has gone missing. Her name is Anne Marie Burr. All the kids in the neighborhood are talking about it. Ted, who's a bit of an outcast among his peers, has a paper route that goes right past the girl's house. He's under no suspicion. He's just a kid. But someone who's familiar with young Ted knows there's something not quite right with him. This boy could kill. That's his Aunt Julia's contention. In 1949, when Ted was 3 and she was 15, she experienced something that would change her whole perspective on Ted. In the middle of the night, as she was sleeping, she was awoken to find Ted slipping butcher knives under her blanket. "What are you doing?" she asked him, startled, her face partly illuminated by the light on the landing. Ted said nothing. He just stood there grinning like a child maniac before calmly walking out of the room. For those first years of his life, Ted watched his grandfather fly into violent rages, swinging cats around by the tail, bashing his heavily depressed wife after indulging in a bit too much whiskey. Ted loved his father. He hated that his mother was so weak. Ted had been lied to, though. He thought his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. It was no place for a child to grow up. So Ted's sister, actually his mother, took him to Tacoma in Washington, and not long after met a cook named Johnny Bundy. They legally adopted Ted, making Johnny his father by law. Now Ted was Ted Bundy, and he'd soon have 4 siblings, 4 contenders for the attention of his parents. Now at 14, Ted is a skinny kid with feminine looks. He gets bullied by the older kids, and so in turn he bullies the younger kids. He sometimes takes them out to the woods, where he forces them to undress. One time he calls them over to show them how he strung up a cat by the neck. This is the genesis of the making of a monster. If he'd been properly treated then, you wouldn't be hearing the grisly details of the rest of the show. Year 3. Ted is now in high school. He has more friends, yet there's something insincere about him. He struggles to form close friendships, especially with girls, who he still watches from a distance. He's now into petty crime, stealing equipment so he can ski. When he's not trying to show off, he's alone, often reading violent detective magazines and looking over pictures of naked women in pornographic magazines. He hates his home life. He's ashamed that his adoptive father, Johnny, earns little money and drives cheap cars. Ted wants better clothes when he goes out to Sears with his mom. He wants fancy things. During the night, he often listens to talk radio, pretending he is the rich and famous person being interviewed. He gets taken away with these fantasies, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he knows that will never be him. This is why the daydreaming of late has been taking a darker turn. He can't stop thinking about hurting people, hurting women. He thinks about sex a lot. He is, after all, in his teens, but his natural urges are often filled with unnatural violence. Try as he might, he can't stop these thoughts. One night, he's doing what he likes to do and sneaks around in the dark of his house when he comes across some of his mother's old documents. It's there he finds his birth certificate. It says, "Father unknown." Sometime later, he's with his friend Tony Storwick at Storwick's parents' beach house when they're talking about Ted's dad. Ted looks at Terry and says, "That's not actually my dad." Ted seems unbothered, but on the inside he's raging with a fire he will never be able to quell. He's attractive, he just doesn't understand love or dating or girls in general. He knows he's supposed to like them, to talk about their bodies or cute faces or what he'd like to do with them, but he doesn't feel it. Not really. That's not to say he hates all girls. Not long ago, he saved Terry's sister Wendy from drowning. He literally saved her life. But another part of him wants to sneak into her room at night and pound her head with a hammer. Year 4. Ted is away at college. He's free from that stepfather. He's just spent $400 on a '58 Volkswagen Beetle, which he uses to go out on long trips by himself. In classes, he barely speaks. He has no friends, male or female. He still feels like an outcast, but then after walking into an international affairs lecture on China, he realizes that being an outcast could be pretty cool. Year 5. He's learning to speak Chinese. He imagines himself an expert on Asia, a specialist on everything exotic, or what he thinks is exotic. He switches to the University of Washington to study Asian studies, and with his new skills, he meets his first love, a student impressed with his language skills and expert use of Chinese chopsticks. But for some reason, when they're alone in his apartment at night, he can't touch her. It's as if he's afraid that any kind of sexual advance will lead him into temptation, those dark, violent urges he's had all his young life. But this girl soon gets sick of him. Instead of acting like a man or taking her in his arms, he'll sneak up behind her, tap her on the shoulder, and then run away. What's wrong with this jerk? They aren't 13 anymore. She dumps him. He can't understand it. After all, he's tried to be nice. He's tried to be normal. It hasn't worked, and so now it's time to be himself. Year 6. On June 23rd, an article in the Spokane Daily Chronicle reads, "An airline stewardess is found beaten to death and one of her roommates critically injured in their Queen Anne Hill apartment." Ted's working as a busboy, and then when he can't hack that anymore, he gets a job stacking shelves at a Safeway store. He drives his car all over the place, seeing his grandparents, the grandfather he still adores, who he knows now is his grandfather and not his father. By this time, he's already seen his official birth records in Burlington. The article in the newspaper continues to describe that Lonnie Trumbull, 20, was found in her bed bludgeoned to death. Lisa Wick was found in her bed almost beaten to death. Both were in their nightclothes. Wick's hair was still in curlers. There's no sign of a struggle. Someone had sneaked into their room and just gone crazy on them. Very soon, murders with this MO and signature will be a common thing. Ted reads this newspaper. He smiles when he puts it down, thinking about how tonight he's going to go out and play one of his favorite games, letting car tires down and seeing how the owner, always a young woman, deals with it as he watches from a distance. This is practice. Year 7. Ted's now back in Seattle at the University of Washington, and this is where he meets Elizabeth Klepfer and her 3-year-old child. He seems clever and charming, and he gets along with her kid, although the games he plays with the girl do sometimes seem strange in nature. Elizabeth has no idea of Ted Bundy's true nature, but she likes what she sees at first. He's a man on the up and up, or at least it looks that way. Year 8. Ted still likes to drive around, seeing relatives in various parts of the country. He's in the Philadelphia area when 2 students, both age 19, have breakfast at a cafeteria and are later found tied to trees, both dead. The girls, Susan Marguerite Davis and Elizabeth Perry, had their hair fastened to the branches. Both had been stabbed to death. This happened on a weekend that Ted shouldn't have been able to drive, seeing as his Aunt Julia had seen him that weekend with his leg in a cast. He told her he'd been in a car accident. No records exist of such an accident, and let's just say Ted wearing casts is about to become a very common occurrence. Year 9. Ted is doing well in his new psychology major. If he's honest with himself, he's chosen psychology because he's so mixed up about his own dark thoughts and his dual personality. In one of his first papers written about schizophrenia, he gets an almost perfect grade. He's been working on a hotline advising people that are going through the darkest parts of their lives to not hurt themselves. He prides himself on being good at speaking to women, especially women who have abusive husbands or women who've been abandoned. Ted keeps them on the line, sometimes for up to an hour, calming them down, letting them know someone loves them and that life can improve. This makes Ted feel elated, knowing he can save lives as well as take them. He muses that somehow, as ironic as it sounds, both actions are kind of the same. Year 10. He's a man of the community, one of the good guys. One evening, he's with a woman named Frida in her kitchen having coffee, and a fly flies into the kitchen. She's about to swat it with the newspaper when Ted jumps up and screams, "Don't kill it!" He makes sure it can escape through a window. Frida, who really likes Ted, later tells her friend he's so gentle. One of his colleagues on the hotline is Anne Rule, a woman who in the years to come will have a lot to say about Ted Bundy. Right now, all she knows is that he spends a hell of a lot of time traveling around in his beloved Beetle. Joyce LePage, 21, goes missing after leaving her friend's car close to the University of Washington. She's been stabbed 3 times. Her body will be found soon. A young woman tells police she saw a yellow Volkswagen Beetle on campus that night LePage went missing. To make ends meet, Ted drives a delivery truck for a medical supplies company called Pedline. He gets along well with the boss until he's caught stealing supplies. The boss is confused when he sees Ted has been plundering his firm of plaster casting materials. What a strange thing to steal, he thinks. But that's only because he doesn't know anything about Ted's burgeoning hobby. Year 11. Ted gets a job working for a Republican governor on his election campaign. He's now going places, or it seems that way. He's dated a few women already, but none of them really knows who he is. He's an enigma, a dog without a home, who can be obedient, cute, and nasty all at the same time. Elizabeth Klepfer adores him, despite knowing she probably shouldn't. Something is not quite right about Ted Bundy, even if he looks like a hot prospect in Republican politics who's just been accepted into law school. Ted's also been seeing his former flame, the one that dumped him before, After spending months re-charming her, enticing her to become devoted to him, he just calls her out of the blue and dumps her right when she thought they were going someplace. Call it revenge. Still, things have ended worse. She has her head intact. Rejection is about as good as it gets with Ted Bundy. Ted is now in a testing phase of what he thinks will be perfect crimes. He's following women around without being seen. He knows he looks middle-class and respectable. He knows it makes him invisible, giving him the anonymity any American psycho could wish for. In the parlance of the FBI, he's organized. However, it'll be some time before the FBI gets serious about profiling killers. He'll also become a lot less organized as time goes on. To the world around him, Ted's a law student who's worked with top politicians. He's an educated young man with good looks and an expansive vocabulary. He's the kind of guy you want to take home to meet your parents, the kind of person you'd stop to offer assistance to in the street, just as 17-year-old Rita Lorraine Jolly might have done when she went out walking near her home in Oregon. The same goes with Vicki Lynn Haller, who also goes missing in Oregon around this time, just as Bundy is going on those weekend journeys around the Pacific Northwest in his car. Both women have never been found, but we know that it was at this point in Ted's life that he said his urge to kill had been so irrepressible that murdering women is all he thought about. Still, in the 70s, during what's sometimes called the golden age of American serial killing, Ted Bundy was one of many so-called lust killers on the loose. Year 12. Ted loves politics. He loves getting invited out for dinner with bigwigs. Being among politicians, he feels empowered. They're driven like him. They'll do or say anything to get what they want. In short, Ted was drawn to psychopaths. He'll later say this line: "Politics was perfect. You can move among various strata of society. You can talk to people whom you'd otherwise have no access." Ted also understands something very important. Cops don't think killers go to university and work for politicians. Ted reads detective books too, which give him all the forensic details he needs to know how to get away with what he thinks are perfect murders. And he's about to get a lot of practice. Year 13, month 1. Only he fails when it comes to killing 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a beautiful dancer who studies at the University of Washington. As with most of his victims, he surveilled her first, seen her get in and out of cars, seen where she goes for classes and where she sleeps. One night he slips into her dorm where she's fast asleep and with furious anger beats her with a metal rod. She survives, but with horrific injuries. The only reason she isn't dead is her roommate, a guy named Chuck, who talked in his sleep, making Ted think the guy had woken up. Meanwhile, his relationship with Elizabeth, his co-worker, is somewhat constrained at times. For her, anyway. She knows Ted steals things. His house is full of stuff he's taken. She doesn't much like this. One time she joked about telling the cops. He said to her without any irony, "If you do, I'll break your neck." One night, while in her apartment, he asks to tie her up, and she lets him do it. She's taken aback by how fast he pulls out a pair of stockings from one of her drawers. He must have known where they were. Ted is terrifying in many ways, but she is very insecure. She's willing to do as he asks because she always thinks he'll leave her for his new posh Republican buddies. It's around this time that Ted writes a paper for the Seattle Crime Commission on how women can protect themselves from abusive and violent men. About a week later, he's with Elizabeth when he chases down a purse snatcher in the street and holds him until the cops turn up. Ted gets in the Seattle Times for his good deed. It won't be the last time he features in this newspaper. The story explains, police said Bundy chased the man on foot in 1st Avenue Northeast and caught him as he was stuffing the purse into a garbage can. Soon after, Ted is given a job at the King County Office of Law and Justice Planning to study why criminals commit more crimes after they've been released from prison. What catches Ted's attention is how police departments from various jurisdictions often fail to work together. Criminals can be known to one police department, so they just move cities to commit more crimes. It makes the life of crime that much easier. This, of course, is fabulous news for Ted. Now he has women's safety campaign experience, some forensic knowledge, and he knows how police departments work. Could a murderer ask for more? Yes. Month 2. Ted sometimes works for Ross Davis, a Republican politician. He's in charge of looking at campaign costs for Davis. The two become friends. Ross's wife, Sarah, loves that Ted is so good with her 2 young kids and how he always talks fondly about his beloved parents back home. One day, Ted goes over to their house to show off his new '68 Beetle. At one point, Ted has to get something from the trunk, and as he's rummaging through what looks like loads of junk, Ross notices something peculiar. Ted has a pair of handcuffs in there. Ted's currently in law school, but it's not what he expected. It's a second-rate place full of people he considers losers. None of them are smart, and they look like they'll never come to anything, unlike him, a budding politician. The problem is the majority of them are receiving much better grades than Ted, and this makes him furious. Someone will have to pay. One night, Ted enters the dorm of Linda Ann Healy. He bludgeons her to death in her sleep, then dresses her in jeans and a white blouse and takes her body away. Why? Because Ted Bundy is not usually a sadistic killer. He's a power control killer. He doesn't want his victims to suffer in front of him as he torments them. He wants power over them. And what more power can you have than being the master of their bodies? He's playing God. He likes to get the killing part done quickly, preferably when they're not looking at him. He sometimes stays with them as they decompose. He washes them and combs their hair. He revisits them until decomposition makes the stench too much for him. He also sometimes takes heads for trophies. Month 3. The Evergreen State College is his next hunting ground. The victim is 19-year-old Donna Gale Manson. Manson is wearing a red, orange, and green striped shirt. She's on her way to a jazz concert on campus. All we know is she doesn't get there. Ted gets to her first. Instead of bashing her in her sleep, this time Ted uses his psychological manipulation routine on her to win her confidence. He's been perfecting this, and soon he'll think he's the best there ever was. Month 4. The next victim is 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt, who goes missing at Central Washington State College. Ted's been skulking around this college all week, trying to pick up quite a few girls. One of them was 21-year-old Kathleen Clara DeLivio. As she sees Ted with his arm in a cast while trying his darndest to carry some books, he politely asks her if she's on the way to the library and can she please give him some much-needed assistance. Why not, she thinks. He's a well-dressed, well-spoken man in need. She's close enough for him to attack, but in her good fortune, she never turns her back. Ted normally only strikes when backs are turned. He doesn't even want to know their names. It's hard to kill them when they have names. It humanizes them. Ted wants a nameless body to have mastery over, not real people with real lives. This breaks the fantasy. Ted purposefully drops some books, but again, DeLivio doesn't turn her back. She helps him carry them over in the direction of the library, trying to chat. Although chatting is the last thing Ted wants to do. He's thinking, just turn around for God's sake. When she sees he's not actually heading to the library, she parts ways with him. He calls her back and asks if she can help him get the books to his car, pointing toward a brown VW Beetle in the parking lot. DeLivio might be kind, but she's in no mood to play mother to some guy. As she walks away again, Ted tries one last thing. "I've dropped my keys," he shouts. "If you could be so kind as to just help me find them." Now she's suspicious. Like many people who've met Ted, her intuition tells her something is not quite right about this guy. She agrees to help but keeps a yard away and never moves in front of him. She then spots the keys that Ted just dropped on purpose. He gives her that look as if to say, "Come on, be a darling, would you? And pick them up. I've got books in my hands." She just looks at him as if to say, "No way. Good luck with your arm," she says, and walks away. That saves her life. She later explains all this to the cops. Her description of him will be vital down the line. Jane Curtis is also unfortunate enough to meet Ted Bundy just a few days later. She bumps into him around 9 p.m. one evening close to the library. This time, Ted pretty much throws the books in front of her and then apologizes, talking about his sling and how it's hard to carry things. She picks some of them up, and they walk toward the library, Ted telling her that he's really grateful. He gives her a strange look and she notices how dark his eyes are. It's as if the pupils are taking up all of the iris. He's actually looking at her, imagining what her decapitated head would look like in his hands. "Skiing accident," Ted says as she looks at the splint on his fingers. This is more manipulation. Not only does he look vulnerable, but skiing must mean he has money. It means he's middle class, another reason for her to trust him. But Curtis is having none of it. Not only does she think this guy is weird, but that splint on his finger looks totally fake. So when he asks her over to his car and for her to kindly open the door, she refuses. He does it himself, and she sees the passenger seat is missing. That's Ted's way of making pushing unconscious bodies into your car that much easier. Again, Curtis thinks this scene is too weird. When he asks her to get in the car with the books, she just leaves, even as he's moaning that his arm just started hurting a lot more. As she walks off in the distance, Ted spits out curse words. He rips off the cast and throws it into the back seat. Someone is going to pay for this. Month 6 through 10. Ted's hardly been attending classes at all. He has other things on his mind. He's been scouting victims, staying up late, going out early in the morning looking for prey. Then he finds someone that fits perfectly into his catalog of obsessions. Her name is Roberta Kathleen Parks. Like most of his victims, she's pretty. She's obviously educated since he knows she's a student at Oregon State University. He doesn't know she's a religious studies student, but the smaller details have never bothered Ted. The day he takes her, her father has a heart attack. She knows nothing of this bad news at the time when she unwittingly gets into Ted's car. His victims so far have been from the Seattle area, but this young woman is studying some 250 miles away. He knows that detectives tend to have what's called linkage blindness. Ted knows from his love of detective magazines that murderers who kill again and again, there's not yet the expression serial killer in the police lexicon, tend to kill near home or at least in one area. Ted is branching out. While most killers lack the confidence to kill in new areas, sometimes just because they don't know the roads or escape routes, Ted is supremely confident. He's spreading his wings. He's going to be a lust killer like none other that came before him. He's going to make it hard for the cops, very hard, despite the fact numerous people have already given a fairly accurate description of his appearance and have talked about a VW Beetle near crime scenes. Ted's not been seeing much of Elizabeth, not just because of the long-distance nature of the relationship. After all, Ted loves to drive, but he also seems preoccupied with something all the time. Even when they're sleeping together, he'll disappear for the weekend. Just the other day, he went out, not saying where he was going, and then flew back into her room explaining that he left his crowbar behind. When she looked at one of his pockets, a surgical glove was hanging out. Month 11. Ted makes his first big mistake. It involves a pair of handcuffs and a really tough Mormon girl. An 18-year-old woman named Carol DeRonch parks her Chevrolet Camaro in front of the Sears store at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. It's evening, and outside is misty and cold. Notably, the town connects with another town where a 17-year-old girl had gone missing 3 weeks prior. She's at the mall to buy a birthday gift for her cousin when she's approached by a guy that identifies himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police. DeRonch comes from a very strict Mormon family, and she's always been told you should respect authority. So when Ted tells her there's been a theft in the car park, she doesn't question it, even though Ted stinks of alcohol and is wearing patent leather shoes not typically worn by cops. His hair is really greasy too. This man looks nothing like an officer of the law. But being the polite, respectful girl she is, she follows him to the car, which, he says, is the one where the theft has taken place. When she sees this is not the case, he tells her they need to go to the small substation, whereupon she finally has the courage to ask for ID. Ted very quickly flashes his wallet, not giving her much time to see. When they get to the substation, DeRonch immediately thinks the place looks more like a laundromat. That's because it is. Ted then says they'll have to go to the main station together, and that's when she gets suspicious. Nonetheless, what if he is a cop and she refuses to go? She'll be the talk of the town for resisting arrest. Her parents will be so ashamed. When they get to the police car, she finds a tatty Volkswagen Beetle that has a large rip on the rear seat. The car is a total mess. How could a cop be driving this, she thinks. But the authority figure talking to her sounds believable, so she gets in. "Fasten your seatbelt," says Ted, and it seems the angels smile on DeRonch at that second because something in her head tells her not to do that. He pulls over at the side of a school. She's now scared out of her wits. The man is definitely not a cop. "What are you doing?" she says, telling him this is not a police station. He grabs her hand, slipping on a pair of handcuffs. "What are you doing?" she screams. Ted barely even looks at her. He says nothing. It's a good thing he only has one handcuff on her because she's able to claw at him like a wild animal. She scratches him so hard her fingernails tear off his skin. "I'll blow your head off," Ted shouts. And she just hits him more, kicking out, using her elbows. Out of nowhere, Ted pulls out a tire iron and tries to bring it down on her head, only for her to grab it just in time. She then manages to get free from his grip and pushes herself out of the car, landing in the street with just one shoe on. Screaming, thinking this man will soon be on top of her, she runs up the road, only to hear not a panting man on her tail, but the car screeching into a U-turn. DeRonch keeps running. She sees headlights in the distance. The elderly couple Wilbur and Mary Walsh are, as usual, driving at the recommended speed. It's foggy outside, after all. Suddenly, in the glare of their lights, they see a girl waving her arms. As they slow almost to a halt, the girl pulls open the door on Mary's side. At first, they think this could be an attack, but when they read the fright on the girl's face, they know that they've likely just saved someone from something terrible. Trembling, crying, handcuffs still dangling from her wrist, DeRonch jumps into the back of the car. Then they make their way to the real Murray Police Station. No survivor has been this close up to Ted Bundy before and lived to tell the tale in such full detail. This matters a lot. A couple of hours later, about 1,500 people are stuffed into an auditorium at Viewmont High School to watch the drama club perform The Redhead. Just before it gets going, a good-looking chap walks up to the drama teacher, Ray Lynn Shepard, in the hallway. He looks well-dressed in his patent leather shoes, but something creeps her out. Maybe it's the way he's looking at her breasts and neck. He almost looks like a hungry animal. The strange man asks her to go to the parking lot to identify a car. She seems taken aback by the request. He tells her, "I've had my eye on you. I know you have time to come outside and identify the car." Creepily, he then gops at her neck again and tells her, "You have really nice hair." A compliment from a good-looking dude on any other occasion might be welcomed, but not from this man. She leaves only later to see the guy in the auditorium watching the last part of the play. He's sitting right behind Dean and Belva Kent, the parents of Deborah, who's also sitting close by. 16-year-old Kathleen Ricks is also in the audience. Raylan doesn't know it, but this creep has asked her to go outside to the parking lot too. At the intermission, Deborah tells her parents she's going to pick up her brother at the ice skating rink. "Don't be late getting back," says the mom, who will never speak to her or see her daughter again. Outside next to her car, police will find a key, a very, very important key. Can you guess what it unlocks? After Kent's disappearance becomes a police matter, a local newspaper runs a story featuring a criminal profiler. The story talks about the Utah abductor, with the profiler saying this guy is likely a Jekyll and Hyde type character, meaning he can gain people's trust as he's well-spoken and smart, the kind of guy you trust after only meeting him once. He's also an animal, says the profiler, a brutal beast living behind a mask of normalcy. Now police in various parts of the Midwest have data on file about a suspicious guy who drives a Volkswagen. They have plenty of accounts about a man with his arm in a sling. What all these departments don't have is connectivity. One witness said a man had approached her and, in what seemed like a British or Canadian accent, had introduced himself as Ted. Now they have a name, too. 5 witnesses say they've been approached in Lake Sammamish State Park near Seattle just recently. This guy was wearing a tennis outfit, another of Ted's ploys to look affluent and harmless. They said he'd asked them to help unload a sailboat from his bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. He was struggling, his arm being in a sling and all. 4 of them refused, but one went with him to his car only to run away when she realized there was no boat. That same day, a pretty 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott agreed to help him as she was sunbathing in her bikini in the park. Ted had said to her, "Excuse me, could you help me move my sailboat? I can't do it myself because I broke my arm." She replied, "Only if I get a ride in that sailboat. I don't know how to sail." Ted laughed and said, "No problem, he'll teach her." Not long after, Ted was in his apartment with her doing what he loved best. Well, he took the head, not the rest of her. It's hard to walk around with bodies. Heads might not afford complete gratification, but they're at least convenient. Later that same day, 19-year-old Denise Marie Naslund was in a restroom. She was with 2 friends, feeling quite high since they'd all taken Valium. She came out of the restroom after splashing her face with water when a polite, handsome man asked her for a favor. She agreed, and when she turned her back, an iron bar came crashing down on her head. 8 weeks later, some hunters found her body in the woods. This was massive news. A predator was abducting and killing pretty women, almost all of them having a certain look and educational background. Sketches appeared in the newspapers again. Police knew this guy wore his arm in a cast. They'd been told about the Beetle numerous times. They now had the name Ted on file. The only problem was they were blind to the fact that educated men who worked for politicians were capable of killing. Year 14, month 2. Elizabeth had spoken to the cops, not to one department, but to King County and also Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. She still kind of loves Ted. They speak on the phone a lot. But after seeing those sketches and reading about a Volkswagen Beetle, the fact the guy is likely handsome and well-spoken, well, she just put 2 and 2 together. At one point, her colleague throws her a copy of the Seattle Times, which contains the latest composite drawing, and says, "Don't you think that looks like someone you know?" Silence. He then asks, "Doesn't your Ted have a VW?" She also knows he always goes missing. She's seen women's panties in his drawers, seen the crowbar. It just has to be him. She doesn't see him much these days. When she does, it's always weird. Just recently, she woke up in the middle of the night and he was sitting over her, staring at her. When she complained, she immediately apologized, fearing she'd upset him. She'll later tell people, "When I felt his love, I was on top of the world. When I felt nothing from Ted, I felt that I was nothing." Month 3. Ted is upset that the body of his winter victim in Colorado is now too decomposed for what he considers his intimate time. He's taken this young woman, Karen Eileen Campbell, and later hidden her body in the woods. Now that winter's coming to an end, he wants a new body, a new love. So he abducts 26-year-old Julie Cunningham from near a tavern in Colorado. The ski instructor has just been through a rough breakup when she bumps into Ted. After getting off the telephone with her mother, she's on her way to the bar for a few drinks. That's when she sees a man hobbling down the street carrying a pair of ski boots. She offers to help, and off they go toward Ted's car. When they get there, she turns her back. He hits her over the head with such force that it almost kills her. He then shoves her in the trunk, drives about 90 miles, and stops the car. As he opens the trunk, she's partly conscious, looking at him with existential fear in her eyes. That's when he strangles her. He just leaves her body and only returns a few months later to bury it. In the next 3 months, he kills 3 more women, 12, 15, and 25 years old. The victims are in Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. He's still banking on that linkage blindness to evade interest from the cops. Cops have now heard the name Ted many times. One of his former colleagues at the Department of Emergency Services has called them and explicitly said the guy you are looking for is her friend, Ted. Month 7. Detectives in Washington State do something novel. They put names into a database, a computer that has been a payroll machine in another life. The cops are getting in the region of 200 calls a day, so this computer helps. They put the name Ted into that database and also add Volkswagen Beetle. Plus, they input all the names of all the victims and the victims' friends in there. Thousands of names pop up, but one name is on 4 different lists. That is Ted Bundy. He's literally the top of the pile. But Ted isn't in Washington right now, he's in Utah. Ted decides to get baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This makes him happy. He's not such a bad guy, God loves him. He's no saint, but not all bad, he thinks. Month 8. At 2:30 a.m. on Saturday, August 16, 1975, Sergeant Robert A. Hayward spots a gray Volkswagen pass by him as he's sitting in his patrol car in a Salt Lake City suburb. He sees the same car a bit later, so he grows suspicious. This looks like a prowler. Then he goes after the car, only for it to take off. They both run a stop sign when Hayward flashes the spotlight at the car. The car attempts to get away and then pulls over at a gas station. Volkswagen Beetles are not known for their speed. Hayward asks to see the man's license. He reads under his breath, Theodore Robert Bundy, 565 First Avenue, Salt Lake City, Utah, date of birth 11/24/46. He tells Hayward he's just been to see the movie The Towering Inferno. Hayward peers inward to see a crowbar and other tools, which he thinks is strange, just because the guy doesn't look like a mechanic. And who drives around with tools so late? Then after some deputies arrive on the scene, they spot what looked like some kind of crime kit. It's Ted's murder kit. They see a crowbar, some handcuffs, some rope, an ice pick, some trash bags, a ski mask, and another mask made from pantyhose. Not the kind of stuff someone takes to the movies, but at first they only think this guy could be a burglar. Back at the police station, a very large-bodied detective, Jerry Thompson, starts to join the dots. He not only remembers very clearly the DeRanch case, but he recalls a phone call that Utah police received from a woman named Elizabeth Klepfer. He's aware that whoever killed Deborah Kent could be the same man who tried to abduct DeRanch. At this point, Ted still thinks the cops are stupid and they just got lucky. He doesn't think they'll get him though, not for what he's really done. Over 20 police agencies in 5 states are looking for him, and yet, here he is, confident as anything, knowing the police are far from seeing the big picture. After searching Ted's house, they have no choice but to let him go. They have nothing on him. It's just a pity they didn't find all those photographs Ted has hidden, the ones of the bodies of his victims, his treasured trophy collection. Month 9. Now Ted's being monitored 24/7. Cops in Utah fly out to Seattle. They speak to Elizabeth face to face. She tells them she always did wonder why her lover kept crutches and slings around the house when he wasn't injured. She tells them that he always has plenty of plaster of Paris and that he definitely isn't into modeling. She says he isn't a surgeon and yet always has surgical gloves around. He has big knives and meat cleavers, and yet she can't remember a time he cooked her dinner. As for the bags of women's clothes, well, Ted isn't the charitable type. In fact, come to think of it, it was really strange that she'd often wake up and find him staring at her neck. And why did he always get so angry when she would tell him she wanted a haircut? Around this time, Ted sells his Volkswagen Beetle to a local student. Now police from all departments where Ted has left a trail of blood get talking. The guy has to be a killer. They get hold of his car from the student and impound it. They find women's hair in there. Month 10. They arrest Ted again. Witnesses from all over come to the station, including DeRanch, who has no problem picking this odious man out of a lineup. You don't easily forget the face of the man who wanted to murder you. As for the handcuffs she was wearing after her escape, the key to them is the key police found next to the car of a missing girl, Deborah Kent. Her body has not been found. It won't until 2015. But the key is key to charging Ted with something serious. They now have enough to at least charge him with the DeRanch kidnapping. It's a start. Still, they can't pin the bigger crimes on him and have no choice but to let him go when his parents pay his $15,000 bail. Strangely, he now spends most of his time at either his parents' house or Elizabeth's house. Psycho Ted has no problem convincing her this is all a big mix-up. Month 11. The cops are certain they have their man, a maniac who's been on a killing spree throughout several states. Detectives meet in Aspen at what'll later be called the Aspen Summit. Year 15, Month 2. At trial, after DeRanch testifies, Ted is found guilty of her kidnapping. Month 5. Ted is told he'll be spending the next 15 years of his life in the Utah State Prison for the kidnapping case. He's laughing inside. Month 10. Ted is caught in the prison yard in the midst of an escape. When guards pull him out of the bush he's hiding behind, they find what they later call an escape kit. He's somehow gotten his hands on a road map, some airline schedules, and even a social security card. Ted still has people believing his innocence, including Elizabeth, who he's brainwashed again. The same month, police have enough to charge him with one of the murders. They know he killed more people, a lot more, but they have to find proof. Year 16, month 7. Seemingly, you just can't hold a bad man down. Since Ted is representing himself by law, when he defends himself, he doesn't have to wear shackles and handcuffs. This he knows, which will be of considerable help soon. He's been getting a lot of support so far. He's written to his Republican friends saying how he's the victim of a setup or at least police incompetence. He said he's scared for his life. Inmates are hardly nice to men that hurt women. His posh friends create the Ted Bundy Defense Fund and raise about $4,000. As his trial approaches, he puts sticky notes in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. He means to show the court what police oppression can do to a man. He'll later admit that he was so proud of himself for such trickery. In jail, Ted eats only healthy food. He has a plan. He's working out and getting strong. He's jumping from the top bunk to practice landing well. He's gotten his hands on maps, and he's memorizing every single street and mountain road in Aspen. He's back in court on June 7th.
First degree, 3 counts, attempted murder in the first degree. Design.
He already knows that a window in the courthouse will be open. He knows he can safely jump from a second-story window. He's just had a haircut, so he looks quite different. He's hidden a red bandana in his pocket. He's also attached some matches and some vitamin pills to a piece of string and hidden them on his body. Under his brown corduroys, he has white tennis shorts. On top, he has a t-shirt hidden under some long johns, and over them is a turtleneck sweater. He's also wearing hiking socks under his boots. He's ready for a long walk in the mountains. Even though he looks much bulkier than usual, the guards taking him to the courthouse don't seem to notice. One of the officers remarks about the lack of handcuffs, to which another officer says confidently, "He's not going to try to get away from us." During recess, Ted heads to the library, where he sees his chance. He jumps out of the open window. Minutes later, a woman walks into the courthouse and, with a shocked look on her face, tells an officer, "A man just jumped out of the second-floor window and ran away."
Out of this second-story window at the front of the Pitkin County Courthouse this morning, he was scheduled for a court appearance and apparently had been locked into the law library by sheriff's deputies.
Ted is running as fast as his legs can take him, tearing off the top layer of his clothes. He jumps over a fence, runs down an alleyway through Main Street, past a restaurant where 2 guys give him funny looks, and after running down another street, he finds a gorge where the Roaring Fork River runs through Aspen. A lot of people see him. His heart is beating out of his chest, but he's free, and he's staying free. When he gets to the foot of a mountain, he starts climbing. He gets so far up that when he looks around, he's got a great view of Aspen. Bliss. The Seattle Times publishes a story the next day. Theodore R. Bundy, former Seattleite, charged with murder in Colorado, and a suspect in murders of young women in Washington State and Utah, leaped to freedom from the second floor of the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado today. An extensive manhunt began. About 100 officers and others were hunting him in nearby mountains and throughout the town. Ted is high up in the mountains, loving the views. He feels so content. He keeps telling himself, "I'm not a fugitive. I'm not Ted Bundy. It's so peaceful up here." He wonders about his mother and Elizabeth, but mostly just enjoys the view, ignorant of the fact that the tracking dogs sent to find him have picked up on the trail of a female hiker going in another direction. 6 days later, hungry and cold and with a sprained ankle, he heads back down into town, and after stealing a car near Aspen Golf Course, he's picked up again. Man, what a great experience that was while it lasted, he thinks. Month 11. One of Ted's former colleagues believes his innocence. She's madly in love with him. Her name is Carol Ann Boone. At this point, she is smuggling money in for Ted, which he'll need later. He's on a strict diet. He's already lost about 1/5 his total body weight. He's skinny as anything, which will help him squeeze between bars for his next escape. Thanks to Boone, he has cash and a hacksaw blade. Ted also has the floor plans of the jail, so he knows there's a crawl space above his cell, and he knows from there he can get into the chief jailer's room. Month 12. He does just that during the Christmas break after getting onto the roof. He gets into the chief jailer's civilian clothes and takes off once more. Before fleeing, he's placed a bunch of books under the sheets so the guards might think he's fast asleep. This time, he's not looking for natural beauty, he wants blood. Year 16, month 1. After stealing cars and hitchhiking, Ted makes it all the way to Florida. He gets a room close to the Florida State University campus, which we might call a very bad case of putting the cat among the pigeons. For a short time, he gets by stealing wallets and shoplifting, but he knows this won't work for long. What he wants now is one final dance with darkness. He's furious at everything, including his $80 a month room, which is filthy and situated in an apartment block he considers is for lowlifes. This is the same man who, to get money, breaks into a 1971 Toyota to steal a new Panasonic TV, a Sony transistor radio, and a Smith Corona typewriter. He then gets into a 1976 Mustang and takes a golf umbrella and a notebook. Why? He can't really sell them. He's just addicted to stealing and always has been. For sustenance, he shoplifts jars of peanut butter, cans of sardines, and other small items he can fit in his pockets. Shortly after, he steals a chicken and a potato salad from the deli part of a supermarket that he's seen close to the sorority house. As 3 female students are fast asleep in their beds at the sorority house, Ted sneaks into their rooms one by one. He beats them wildly over the head, knocking them unconscious with a hammer. He rips at one girl with his teeth. Some things are unmentionable, but even for Ted, this is overkill. These girls end up looking like a ravenous bear had attacked them. 2 of the 3 victims survive, but with horrific life-changing injuries. He walks 8 blocks and attacks another woman who also barely survives. Later that night, Ted walks back to his apartment. There, as he's standing outside on some cement steps, the 2 other residents bump into him. Later in court, they testify he was in complete silence. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there. That's Ted, relaxed and satiated after murder. Ted will explain in time to an interviewer what it was like becoming this wild beast of a man. He said the more an actor acts in a role, the better he becomes at it. The more he's apt to feel comfortable in it, to be able to do things spontaneously. Month 2. Ted kills Kimberly Diane Leach after abducting her from Lake City Junior High School in Florida. One minute she told a teacher in her homeroom she was just going to get a purse, and the next she was gone. She'd fallen for that old Ted Bundy confidence trick. For this, her throat is slit with a sharp knife. A few days later, out on the prowl looking for victims or people to steal from, Ted's driving a stolen car when he's pulled over. This isn't long after he's run from a Holiday Inn after failing to pay for his breakfast with stolen credit cards. He's also been thrown out of a bar after trying to take money from people's handbags. The bartender spotted him, and soon Ted was being chased away by bouncers. There was literally nowhere for him to go now. He's drunk out of his mind, and he knows this is the end of his time on the run. The cop who pulls him over questions him outside the car, during which time Ted kicks him in the legs and runs as the officer fires warning shots into the air. He doesn't get far and is soon tackled to the ground and thrown into the back of the police car. The Florida cop has no idea who he has in his car. He's not aware that he is currently carrying one of the USA's most vile creatures. Ted knows the jig is up, and that's why he says to the officer, "I wish you'd killed me." Month 5. Ted writes a letter to a local newspaper. It says, "I've killed no one. Outside of a few minor thefts, I've done nothing wrong. What the media reports now is completely one-sided, nothing but accusation and insinuation, spoon-fed by investigative authorities." Month 8. The evidence is stacking up. More bodies are given the Ted Bundy signature. Ted calls for his lawyer. From his cell, he says, "I want you to explore the possibility of a plea bargain." Year 17. The newspapers write about Ted Bundy in a way they certainly wouldn't write about other killers or even drug dealers or street hustlers. The tone in the article feels almost exculpatory. The New York Times writes a story with the headline, "All-American Boy on Trial." The article says he seemed so relaxed in the courtroom, which some onlookers explained was natural for a young man with 2 years' experience in law school. The general gist is, how could such a nice young man in a suit with a college education do such bad things? It will be decades until academic papers and books start talking about how many psychopaths live among us in positions of power. Year 18. The Miami Herald runs the headline, "Nation's Eyes on Bundy." The story starts, Theodore Robert Bundy, a native of Vermont, a resident of Washington, a convict of Utah, an escapee of Colorado, a prisoner of Florida, is now perhaps the most famous criminal defendant in America. During the trial in Florida, Ted marries Boone. He's read in some law book that despite his precarious position, this is actually possible during a trial.
Carol, do you want to marry me? I want to marry you. I do want to marry you.
The marriage takes place after witnesses have said things that make the jury's skin crawl. One survivor explains, "I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head. The 8th nerve was damaged, and I lost hearing in my left ear and my equilibrium. And I had a broken jaw, and my left shoulder was pulled out of joint." Boone doesn't believe a word of it, or at least she thinks that her Ted wouldn't do that. Year 19. Outside the court, protesters hold placards. One reads, "Ted should be dead." Another says, "Juice Ted's caboose." The court hears that Ted was a traumatized youth. His Aunt Julia, now a grown woman, explains how he used to put those butcher knives in her blanket as she slept at night. Psychiatrists talked about his depressed grandmother and violent grandfather. This is what created Ted's bipolarity, they say. Ted is handed the death penalty. It's the 3rd time this has been handed down to him, but this will be the last one. Ted is now a celebrity killer despite being the most wretched human on earth that has caused unimaginable pain to so many families.
His trial has attracted a steady and unusual stream of spectators. Robin Lloyd of station WTVJ reports.
Each day, the courtroom is filled with spectators drawn by a fascination with Theodore Bundy.
The courtroom is always filled with women who have dressed and cut their hair in the style of Ted's preferred victims. These women are being called Bundy groupies. Even after the heinous things Ted has done, the judge seems to take pity on him, speaking in a way he certainly wouldn't speak to a poor thief or a consumer of heroin. Ted is also still fooling people, continuing to portray an image of innocence, as is evidenced when the judge tells him,
"Lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity to you. I want you to know that. Take care of yourself." Thank you. Court will be in recess. Remain seated, please.
It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You've made a good lawyer. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity towards you. I want you to know that. Take care. Year 20. Ted's daughter Rose is born. This comes as a surprise to everyone. Some people believe Ted and Carol Boone sneaked off to have sex either when the guard wasn't looking or when the guard was away. Others believe Ted had squirted his life juice into a container and passed it on to Carol, after which she artificially inseminated herself in the bathroom. Year 23. Agents from the FBI's fairly new behavioral science unit visit Ted numerous times. They want to know what makes a serial killer. One time, Ted tells an agent, "The fisherman drowns going underwater, but I can take you there without drowning, if I trust you and if I decide." Speaking of killing, Ted explains, "It becomes possession. They're part of you. After a while, when you plan these, that person becomes a part of you, and you two are forever one. You feel the last bit of breath leaving their body. You're looking into their eyes, and basically, a person in that situation is God. You then possess them, and they shall forever be a part of you." Little by little, he tells them of the other victims, ones he's decapitated, heads he kept as trophies, bodies he caressed and slept with after shampooing their hair and putting lipstick on them. Year 27. Up to this point, Ted has confessed to 30 murders, but he's certainly killed more people than that, maybe even 100, but likely closer to 50. He's now finished talking to reporters, to psychologists, to his adoring fans. He's admitted what he used to do with those putrefying bodies, perhaps the hardest thing for him to admit, because it's so disgusting. Last a day. His head is now shaven. He's refused to eat the last meal of steak and eggs that's been handed to him. At age 42, right before Ted takes his final breaths in the electric chair, he shows again how warped and out of touch he is, when in his final words he says, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." The executioner sends 2,000 volts of current flowing through Ted's copper-lined skull cap. His fists clench as his body jolts. After a minute, a paramedic walks over to check his pulse. The silence is deafening. A few minutes later, Dr. Frank Kilgo walks up to Ted's still body and takes the hood from the head. As the witnesses watch, still in shock, some angry, some relieved, the doctor says, "He's dead." "He was a shy man," she said. "He was dignified and restrained," she contended. "Not like the other guys." She said this of the man that brutally attacked young women with iron bars, decapitated some of them, and sometimes returned to their dead bodies so he could get up close to them one more time. She said he was manly, charming, responsible, not like those damned lefty hippies that were plaguing the good old USA at the time. So we ask you, what the hell was this woman thinking? Let's just say it's complicated. The man we're talking about, of course, was Ted Bundy, perhaps the most accurate embodiment of a psychopathic serial killer, the quintessential personification of evil. The woman that thought so highly of him and was eventually impregnated by him was Carol Boone, perhaps the embodiment of recklessly naive, or maybe something even worse. Theodore Robert Bundy doesn't need much of an introduction. Even people that aren't that curious about maniacal murderers know something about old Ted. He was, after all, an anomaly even for a serial killer. He was an educated man, a political man, a guy who held down good white-collar jobs and at the exact same time was doing unspeakably wicked things to people. It's this uncomfortable juxtaposition that makes him so frightening. And more so for the fact that, unlike the vast majority of serial killers, there doesn't seem to be any obvious childhood trauma that set him off on his life of killing. He was good-looking, financially stable, and to those that didn't see his sadistic side, quite charming and funny. One minute he was working in an office for a Republican Party representative, or perhaps writing pamphlets on how women could stay safe in those mean streets, or even giving them advice through a hotline. And the next minute he might be combing the hair and caressing the face of a decomposing woman he'd earlier strangled. This makes him the thing of nightmares, because Ted Bundy could have been your buddy, your colleague, or your confidant. It was the charm of his and his fairly successful career that proved to be one of the greatest tools of misdirection. He was in the FBI's parlance an organized killer, and it's these kinds of killers that proved to be the hardest to catch. He might have started killing in 1961 when his first victim was a 14-year-old girl, but the jury is still out on that one. But we do know for sure that his urges to kill started young. He may have been disgusted with himself, but that didn't stop him from fantasizing about murder and trying to figure out how he might get away with it. When he was 27, he officially tried to begin his enterprise of serial killing. His victim was 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a student at Washington University. We say try because despite his best efforts, which consisted of him savagely attacking her with an iron rod as she slept in her bed, she survived. What he did do to her was about as beastly as you can imagine, leaving her with catastrophic injuries, including a split bladder and brain damage. Bundy would employ many tactics in his crimes, and one tactic included stalking his prey beforehand so he knew when the woman would be alone. He officially opened his murder account on February 1, 1974. The victim was a 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy. She was a Washington University undergrad who was never seen again by anyone until her body was discovered close to Seattle's Taylor Mountain around a year later. And as you already know, Bundy would sometimes return to the bodies, groom them, and despite their putrefying state, how should we put it, do stuff to them. Bundy ended up confessing to 30 murders, of which 20 were confirmed. But it's very likely he committed more murders than we know about. Some people say as many as 100. We won't go through all of them today, been there, done that, but we will say that not all his murders were a beat to death in bed routine. Sometimes he used that charm of his. He talked to his victims, gained their confidence. After all, he was smartly dressed, handsome, well-spoken, and he even drove a very innocent-looking Volkswagen Beetle. No doubt this car was just another part of his manifold cunningness. Despite the fact that inside that car was what you might call the essential serial killer starter kit. Ski mask, crowbar, garbage bags, ice pick, gloves, handcuffs. Bundy was pretty much the opposite of the kind of person movies and TV had back then described as killers. Baddies had long hair and tattoos. They were poor and spoke the language of the gutter. Thanks to the public's discrimination, Bundy had an ideal mask to hide behind. He started killing as if he had a quota to meet, and he also changed his tactics. This is when the charm kicked in. The first victim to fall for it was 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt. She'd been walking close to Central Washington State College when she just disappeared. We know what Bundy must have done because that day he'd unsuccessfully tried to get other women into his car. One of them was 21-year-old Kathleen Clara de Olivo. She later informed the police that she saw Bundy struggling to carry a bag of books. His arm was in a sling and his hand had a splint on it. He made sure she saw him struggling and then he asked for some help. Importantly, she never turned her back on him. This was when he would usually knock women unconscious or close to it with an iron bar. He dropped the books, as he often did, and she helped him carry them to his car. But as she explained to the detectives, I was cautious at this time. I mean, even while we were walking, I thought, well, I'm not going to let him get behind me. I'm going to keep an eye on him. Unfortunately, not everyone was that careful. Bundy was persuasive indeed, and that's why so many people fell for his tricks. One of his junior high school buddies once said this about Bundy's ability to sell Christmas trees during the holiday period. Ted was the best damned Christmas tree light salesman I'd ever seen. So you get the picture. Bundy has often been categorized as a power control serial killer, meaning he got off sexually on the highest form of control, which is the ability to take someone's life and let them know it. Some killers are more sadistic, wherein the murder part is not as important as the seeing the expressions of pain on people's faces. But Bundy was also a sadist, in that he often kept his victims alive for a while so he could experience their pain. The domination was more important, though, which was why he returned to the bodies. It's why he took photos of the victims, to relish in his work. Some sexual sadist serial killers, meanwhile, have said they don't really care if the person lived or died. Bundy even gave things he'd stolen to other women, the ones he decided not to kill. So if he stole a ring from a victim, he might hand it to his date. That way he could admire his work every time he saw her and got some kind of sick thrill out of knowing she had no idea she was wearing the jewelry of a woman who was at the time being eaten by maggots. We hope this introduction to Mr. Bundy has been efficient enough at outlining what kind of guy he was. Now you need to know about the other part of his life. Carol Boone was by no means the only woman that took part in Bundy's life in what you might call his extra serial killing activities. As we said, he was pretty popular, especially to a certain kind of woman. Bundy was definitely not one of those liberal lefties with long hair and Led Zeppelin t-shirts that were pretty common in the 70s. He was a proud Republican and even worked on Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign and later other Republican campaigns. Notably, though, it's said in his university years he was dumped by a lover. Needless to say, he didn't deal well with the rejection. On top of that, sometime later, he found out that those people he'd always called mom and pop were actually his grandparents, and that woman he called his sister was his mother. So when experts talk about his trauma, this is what they often mention, although it's trauma light compared to what many other serial killers experienced in their lives before taking up murder as a pastime. According to the book The Stranger Beside Me, The True Crime Story of Ted Bundy, One day he went to find his birth certificate and was taken aback when he saw the word illegitimate was stamped over it. According to some sources, his father might have been a sailor or possibly an Air Force veteran. So a young Bundy had just been dumped by a young woman for apparently being immature, and then his hatred for women, or at least his need to have power over women, increased when he found out what his mother had done. Some men in this position might have become slightly misogynistic. Better men would just get over it. But Bundy must have decided it was time to smash women's skulls and sleep with their dead bodies. During all those murders, he was actually dating a woman named Elizabeth Klepfer. She'd been down on her luck, trying to take care of a daughter alone while drinking through the nights by herself. Then one night in a bar, she met this charming young man, Ted. She told him she had a secretary job at the University of Washington Medical School, and he didn't seem bothered one bit when she informed him that a babysitter was presently looking after her young daughter at home. Ted didn't mind this, of course, since she was vulnerable. And also, the sound of a young daughter is never a bad thing for a maniac. Klepfer later described their relationship with words that summed up his malignant narcissism. He was glad to have power over her, and he made sure she was always insecure about their relationship. She said, "I handed Ted my life and said, 'Here, take care of me.' He did in a lot of ways, but I became more and more dependent upon him. When I felt his love, I was on top of the world. When I felt nothing from Ted, I felt that I was nothing." She didn't, of course, know anything about his murderous activities, but as time went on, she became suspicious when he went out at night or when she found women's underwear in the house and what looked like that murder kit we mentioned earlier. He tormented her, as many narcissists would do. She later said, "We'd be getting along fine, and then a door would slam and I'd be out in the cold until Ted was ready to let me back in. I'd spend hours trying to figure out what I had done or said that was wrong. She hadn't done anything wrong. This was manipulation, him exerting control over her very spirit. He'd then get all loving again, and the cycle was on repeat for years. Then, when news reports started saying police were looking for a man named Ted who drove a Volkswagen Beetle, well, those pairs of panties, that meat cleaver, and the ski mask started to feel a bit sketchy to Klepfer. Not to mention the drawings that the cops put out that looked a lot like her cruel lover. She eventually called the police, and she said she might know the man they're looking for, but unfortunately at first her words fell on deaf ears. Still, when he was eventually arrested in 1975, she helped the cops with their case. Bundy still wrote to her in prison, sometimes sweetly, but once admitted that he tried to kill her by filling the house with smoke. Another time he said he loved her, and when he felt his maniac urges come back, he kept the distance from her. She later said that he told her whenever he felt the power of his sickness building in him, he left her alone. And this brings us to Carol, whom he met while in prison. He'd actually dated her in the past during his killing period. They worked together at the Department of Emergency Services. This is where they both worked on finding missing women, a job that Ted should have been pretty good at since he knew where many of the victims were. Yet he'd actually killed some of those women that they were looking for. Goes without saying, though, that doing this job was just another part of his sick games, as well as being a pretty good cover for a woman killer. Prior to that job, he worked as an assistant director at the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. That was where he wrote a pamphlet on how women could avoid male abuse. We don't know much about their early relationship, but it might have been more platonic than sexual. Boone had been through 2 divorces with a kid named James, and so it seems she enjoyed the company of another fella after long periods of difficulties with men. In her loneliness, Ted saw an opportunity through her vulnerability. Many years after they first met, she said, "I liked Ted immediately. He struck me as being a rather shy person with a lot more going on under the surface than what was on the surface. He certainly was more dignified and restrained than the more certifiable types around the office." But it seems that the platonic nature of their relationship lasted right up until he was sitting in a jail cell in Florida looking at a long time in prison. He'd recently brutally killed 2 young women at the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida, and in a series of savage attacks injured 3 more women. He'd done this all on the same day that he also kidnapped and killed a junior high school student. At this point, some folks in America were wearing Ted Bundy t-shirts. To them, he looked like a golden boy, a man who was sailing through the American dream with flying colors. Bundy protested his innocence, and Boone took the stand in Florida and served as his character witness. Good old Ted, he could never have done the things they were saying. It was in court that he asked Boone to marry him. Bundy knew the law, and so he understood an obscure code found in Florida legislation that said he was within his rights to do so. The marriage was binding because all this happened in front of a judge. On February 9, 1980, Carol Ann Boone and Ted Bundy were legally paired. Bundy looked around the courtroom, proud of himself, and declared, "We didn't do this for your benefit. It was the only chance to be in the same room together where the right words could be said. It was something between she and I. He needed to work on his grammar because the correct way to say it is her and me. if we're going to be pedantic. Bundy wasn't as clever as he thought he was. He even had a ring, thanks to a writer who'd been visiting Bundy going out and buying one for him. The psycho again was getting his way. He was making a mockery of the justice system and further tormenting the families of his victims. But, as always, the media was having a field day. All over the US, there were eyes on screens and inside newspapers hoping to find anything about this man Bundy. A year and a bit later, Boone had Bundy's child. How this happened exactly is up for debate, but some media have described the event as a moment of cloak and dagger intimacy. While Boone might have visited Bundy at every opportunity available, they weren't permitted to have conjugal visits, i.e. highly intimate dalliances that can produce babies. Boone did once say she had sex with him, stating about the guards, "They walked in on us a couple of times." There's an unproven rumor that the two got it on behind a vending machine somewhere in the visiting room, and another rumor saying that they didn't have sex at all. Another rumor, probably untrue, is that they kissed one time and she passed him a condom. He then filled it, later slyly passed it back, and she did the rest. It's possible that can work, as sperm can live outside the body for a certain amount of time, and definitely long enough for Boone to say goodbye and then head straight to the bathroom to undergo a kind of artificial insemination. During her pregnancy, she kept on visiting him and sending him so-called care packages. Then on October 24, 1982, a little bundle of Bundy joy screamed its way into the world. Blissfully unaware, she was the proud product of a man they called a monster. When asked about the child, Boone told everyone it was none of their business. "I don't have to explain anything about anyone to anybody," she said. Bundy now had a daughter, a girl named Rose. This further enamored him to the many women in the USA that became one of his fans. As you know, some women have a weakness for killers, which is not something we'll get into today. We will tell you, though, that many women turned up in the courtroom with their hair done the way Bundy liked. These groupies knew very well what his victims had looked like, so they styled and dressed to impress when their man stood in front of the judge. In 1986, Bundy was put on death watch, which is the step behind sitting in a chair and having your body smacked with 2,000 volts of electricity. Now, Boone couldn't have a contact visit, and it seems talking through a plastic wall sent little Rose into fits and tantrums. She didn't know what her pop had done, she just wanted a big hug. Bundy's execution was stayed, but it seems Boone later changed her whole outlook on him, likely when she heard that he'd killed the little girl. She certainly fell apart when he started making some death row confessions. It was a massive loss of face for her, and also resulted in a broken heart. This was the woman who once said, "Let me put it this way. I don't think that Ted belongs in jail. I've never seen anything in Ted that indicates any destructiveness toward any other people." She was the woman who once described Bundy in 3 words: kind, warm, and patient. After she found out the truth, she just took off and kept out of the limelight, possibly staying with a sick relative. In 1986, she divorced him. In 1989, she got a call from Bundy's lawyer and was informed about his imminent death. On January 19th that same year, Bundy was visited by her son James, who it seems had grown to like his stepfather. For the first time, Bundy looked him square in the face and said, "I did all the things they've accused me of, and more." January 24th was the day he was executed. This is how it went according to a journalist who was there. An anonymous executioner pushed the button. 2,000 volts surged through the wires. Bundy's body tensed and his hands tightened into a clench. A tiny puff of smoke lifted from his right leg. A minute later, the machine was turned off and Bundy went limp. Boone and James weren't there. She didn't even call to ask if the deed was done. She knew, and had for some time, the whole truth about Bundy. If you're wondering if she ever had any inkling in the past, the answer is she probably didn't. One expert in the matter said in an interview, she absolutely believed he was innocent. There were so many people who thought he was innocent and being railroaded. There wasn't really any good evidence against him in any of the cases, so Carol Boone was surrounded by people who fed her the idea that he was innocent. And you know, when you're in love, you want to be fed that. Besides the late confessions, it was when Bundy had made an agreement with the authorities that she started to realize who he was. He'd been given a plea deal by the cops. Tell us where the bodies are and we might not make you sit in a highly electrified chair. So he told them. Boone must have been like, damn. Both Carol and Rose changed their last name because at the time in America being a Bundy wasn't exactly cool. She lived as much as was possible in obscurity and passed away in a retirement home in 2018. As for Rose, she also kept that head of hers well and truly down. God knows how many freaks would have wanted to write to her or how many psychiatrists would have liked to get inside her head. And you can imagine how life would have been for the girl and the woman if she ever introduced herself as the daughter of America's biggest maniac. Anne Rule, who knew Bundy in life, later wrote about him, once saying, "All I know is that Ted's daughter has grown up to be a fine young woman." Rose is probably out there now, maybe even watching this, although we guess she had enough hearing about her sick psycho of a pop. Let's leave you with something Bundy once said, perhaps the most chilling thing he ever said. "We serial killers are your sons, we're your husbands, we're everywhere, and there will be more of your children dead tomorrow." February 15, 1978, Pensacola, Florida. The orange Volkswagen Beetle tore down the road, the headlights slicing through the darkness. Behind the wheel was Ted Bundy, one of America's most terrifying serial killers. He was on the edge, broke, hungry, and running out of places to hide. Just days before, he left another victim in his wake, adding to a grim and growing list. Weeks earlier, he'd slaughtered 4 students from Florida State University. A trail of blood, trauma, and death stretched out behind him. Red and blue lights pierced the night behind him. A police cruiser loomed in Bundy's rearview mirror. He barely registered it. After a brief struggle, police officer David Lee wrestled Bundy into the back of his squad car, handcuffs binding his wrists. Lee had no idea that he had just arrested America's most feared man. We'll take you on a disturbing trip through the last day of his life in today's episode of the Infographics Show. The final 24 hours of Ted Bundy. 24 hours left to live. January 23, 1989. Dawn breaks over Florida State Prison. Crowds of people gather outside, braving the morning chill. Some have camped out in a nearby field. They want to be the first to hear that the vilest man in America is dead. A man looks at the morning sun. On his t-shirt are the words, "Burn, Bundy." A girl next to him throws his arms in the air with an almighty yawn. "Ted will fry" are the words printed on her chest. She's waited all night for this moment, along with countless others. It's going to be a long day. 23 hours left to live. Bundy pokes at his breakfast. His appetite has left him. He is tired, drawn out, and has hardly slept for days. Should he tell the truth? Should he clear his sins? He's already told his longtime former girlfriend Liz Kleffer what he is. His nearest and dearest know he's a monster, but there's more. Not just who he killed, but why he did it. He couldn't stop himself. How many women had he murdered? 30, 50, 100? From Seattle to Oregon, Washington, Utah, Idaho, maybe 7 states in all, maybe more. Ted has buried bodies, and only he knows where they are. He knows he is different, crazy even, shampooing dead girls' hair, spending nights beside cold, lifeless bodies. He knows this isn't normal. Today he'll face the inevitable question, what really drove him to cross the line, to delve into the darkest depths of human behavior? He doesn't want to die. He cries like a child thinking about old Sparky, the electric chair that will seal his fate. He needs to see a priest. He puts his head in his arms and cries again under an unsympathetic gaze of the Death Watch guards. 22 hours left to live. Pastor Fred Lawrence appears at the cell door. He's holding a Bible in his hand. It's not the first time Lawrence has ministered to a man on death row. Today he'll be Ted's guide into the afterlife. Lawrence takes a seat in a small holding area next to the cell. "Ted, tell me something about your life in the church growing up," probes Lawrence. Honestly, Ted isn't very religious. He'd written Methodist on his intake form only because he'd attended a few services as a kid. At one point, he was even the Methodist Youth Fellowship's vice president. But he doesn't really believe in God, and God doesn't believe in him. His mind is cast back to his childhood, the secrets, the lies, his mother pretending to be his sister, his violent grandfather, his chronically depressed grandmother. He'll lie about it later. But deep down, he has known all along he was never like the other kids. He once sneaked into his Aunt Julia's bedroom while she slept, knives in his hand, and he slipped them under her blanket. She woke with a scream, his grin only widening as she stared in horror. He knows today he is going to have a very different phone call with his mom. 21 hours left to live. Former detective and now chief criminal investigator Bob Keppel looks at his notes. Yesterday, he interviewed Ted for the final time. Keppel is under no illusion he's dealing with a master manipulator. In that final interview, the debriefing, as Ted's lawyer called it, there were mind games. Out of the 50 or so serial killers Keppel will study in his life, none are as tricky or as demented as Ted Bundy. Ted knows his Keppel interviews were his last chance at securing more years of life for himself. 20 hours left to live. Diane Weiner has stood by Ted as his civil attorney. She is sitting at her desk cluttered with papers on her most notorious client. She can't leave the house without the media hounding her. A few days ago, after another of Ted's grim disclosures, she told the press Ted Bundy feels morally compelled as he faces death to do the right thing. She's hoping, maybe in vain, that the Supreme Court will issue a delay. He's already had 3. 19 hours left to live. In houses all over America, the families of the victims are suffering in silence. Yet outside the prison, there is a carnival atmosphere. More people have turned up. A woman about 40 holds a placard in the air. It reads, "Roast in peace, Ted Bundy." A college student named Nanda Rogers is standing by herself. She is not jeering or laughing like the rest. A reporter asks her why she's there. She replies, her face stern, I believe in the sanctity of human life, even Ted Bundy's life. In that growing crowd, she is a minority of one. During Ted's initial trial, before he escaped for the first time, young women, groupies, sat in the public gallery. Perversely, they'd styled their hair like Ted's young victims. That was when the newspapers were still calling him the All-American Boy. It was before he murdered a schoolgirl in Florida, before he killed a group of sleeping sorority students. 18 hours left to live. Ted sits alone in his cell, shadows creeping along the walls, memories echoing through his mind. He was a Boy Scout once, a psychology student with a promising future. So how did he end up here, trapped with nothing but his own haunting thoughts? He had a promising career in Republican politics in Washington. He'd even had a job as an assistant director at the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. And that's where he met Ann, his best friend. They chatted all night at work between advising people on the helplines, where Ted would often talk women out of hurting themselves. He'd always watch Ann from the window walk to her car when she left at night. "You can't be too careful," he'd say. "There are bad men around. A killer is on the loose." And it was him. He was the bad man, the baddest of them all. Ann hadn't returned his letters for a long time. She was tired of his bad poetry, of his mind games. She wouldn't ever forgive him. Ted tries to get some sleep. He's got his TV interview coming up. 16 hours left to live. It's time for Ted's final interview, the one he'd rehearsed in his head. He sits across from the Christian psychologist Dr. James Dobson. 6 guards stand around the two men. "For the record, are you guilty?" asks Dobson. "Yes, that's true," replies Ted. Ted then tells Dobson about his wonderful childhood with parents who didn't smoke or gamble in what Ted says was a solid Christian home. It was pornography, Ted says, that must have warped his mind. The lights suddenly go off. "Don't worry," says Ted. "They'll soon come back on. It's because they're testing the electric chair." Ted says he takes full responsibility. He created fantasies and they became darker and darker. It was like an addiction. He had a destructive energy, especially when he applied alcohol on the fire of his fantasies. He said when he returned to the bodies, caressing them, beheading some of them to take as trophies, he was always drunk. Ted doesn't want to take responsibility for his crime. Violence on TV, porn, booze, that's what made him do it. He tells Dobson he'd wake up the next morning disgusted in himself, but he always needed more. "I don't want to die," he says as he lectures Americans on graphic violence in the media. As his former best friend Ann would say, Ted was a human robot, a machine designed to mimic human emotions. For months after this interview, she'll receive letters every day, all from women. "Ted was a good man," they'll say. One girl wrote, "He wouldn't have hurt me. All he needed was some kindness." 14 hours left to live. Liz Klepfer sits at home contemplating Ted's confessions to her. He'd been so sweet at times in their relationship, and then he would switch, his eyes jet black, frightening tunnels she had no intention of ever going down. "I have a sickness," he told her when he finally confessed what he was. "But I don't have a split personality. I don't have blackouts. I remember everything I've done." If that's true, then there is a lot more he can say about his crimes on this final day. 12 hours left to live. Carol Ann Boone, Ted's last lover and biggest supporter throughout his trial, is at home watching TV. It's all about Ted. She believed him for so long. She'd agreed to marry him when he proposed during the trial, taking advantage of a loophole in the law. What was Carol going to tell little Rose when she got older? Rose, barely 6, the product of a prison visit with a man Carol once called kind, warm, and patient. Carol Ann hasn't spoke with Ted for a long time. The illusion is shattered. She sees him for what he is. But she has a plan. Change her surname, take Rose, and escape Bundy's shadow once and for all. 11 hours left to live. Keppel thinks about his interview yesterday. Ted faced him through a window in one of the visitors' rooms. Diane Weiner was there. A tape recorder sat on Ted's side. Ted looked even paler under the room's sickly lime green light, but that unfamiliar, unsettling smile still flickered across his face. Ted trusted Keppel, but Keppel didn't trust him, not one bit. "There's another body," said Ted. He described burying her on Taylor Mountain near the others. "Donna Manson. I picked her up at Evergreen State College." He told Keppel the femur the detectives had found at another site was from Georgiana Hawkins. This case had haunted Keppel for years. Hawkins had vanished so easily. Ted was waiting for Hawkins in the shadows of a dark alley. Ted explained he was on crutches that night, faking a broken leg. So many of his victims had fallen for this ploy. In his articulate, charismatic way, he asked her to help him carry his briefcase. When they got to his car, he hit her with a tire iron as she made the mistake of turning her back on him. Ted looked pained as he explained that she was alive and quiet. Keppel listened, the tape recorder whirring. Ted recounted Hawkins' struggle. his voice chillingly calm as he explained how she became animated on the way to her fate. To cut a long story short, Ted said with a small, unsettling smile, I hit her again. Then he strangled her. Then Ted turned to the girls from Lake Sammamish. He'd lured them with a smile, his shiny white tennis shoes, his relaxed summer shorts. There weren't just 2 bodies there, he told Keppel, his voice barely audible. There were 3. And then, unexpectedly, Ted's eyes filled with tears. Keppel watched, wary. Were they real? Was this part of the act? Tears trailed down Ted's face, his voice cracking as he whispered, there are more. The interview was ending. Time was up. As Ted was escorted back to his cell, Keppel headed for a phone in the visiting area, his mind still racing. He dialed his superior, his voice tense. There are more, he said. He's still holding back. He's trying to save his own life. There were at least 100 bodies, Keppel was sure of it. The man once voted the shyest boy in class at junior high school was a predator without equal. With hours left until Ted's execution, Keppel felt a gnawing frustration. If only he had more time, he could get the rest of the truth. 8 hours left to live. Ted's back in his cell, his head resting against the cold bars. He's heard phones ringing all day and night. The Supreme Court could stop this. Surely he'd given Keppel enough to get the delay that he so dearly wants. Outside, detectives work against the clock. They've combed through the burial sites Ted mentioned, but several feet of snow hide any sign of evidence. In Seattle, officers scour neighborhoods searching for a Tiger 10-speed bike, serial number 290, linked to one of his victims. 7 hours left to live. At Florida State University, the air is thick with smoke from the cookout. Students have gathered laughing and cheering under a banner that reads, Watch Ted fry, see Ted die. They're flipping Bundy burgers on the grill and handing out electrified hot dogs. Chi-Fi House, where Ted murdered 2 young women and left 2 more gravely injured, is mere steps away. For some, Bundy burgers and hot dogs are an insult to the suffering of these young women. 5 hours left to live. It's time for Ted to call his mother, Louise, and tell her that he loves her. He's sorry he hurt her. It's his fault. She did nothing wrong. Mom, he says, the Ted you knew, he always existed. He tries to call Carol, no answer. He tries again, same. He can't handle the rejection, so he makes another call to his mom. You'll always be my precious son, she tells him, her hand cupping the receiver to shield the noise in her busy house. 4 hours left to live. Outside the prison, hundreds of reporters and TV news crews are wondering what's taking so long. He was supposed to be dead by now. 3 hours left to live. Can you read to me? Asks Ted. Pastor Lawrence pulls out a poem he'd written. For the first time in days, a hint of peace softens Ted's haunted face. His eyes drift shut, his tense body loosening ever so slightly. A guard suddenly appears. It's time for the last meal. Ted is asked for steak and eggs. He doesn't touch any of it. 2 hours left to live. Ted has his last meeting with his attorney, Polly Nelson. She's tried everything to save Ted's life. She knows he is sick, but killing people who kill people she believes is wrong. On this last visit, Ted lays his head in her hands. She feels sorry for him as his handcuffs cut into his wrists. She'll later write, I had never been this way with Ted before, touching him, comforting him, but today was very, very different. This was the same man Keppel will say was a black hole, a destructive force that drew people in and swallowed them whole. This force was strong. It was irresistible to some. Polly has to leave. She'll later explain, to my amazement, I was propelled against the glass to kiss and hug Ted as best we could. I didn't know how I got there. It was a force from within, beyond my control. I walked out the door and I burst into tears. 1 hour left to live. Lawrence takes his communion kit and blesses the wafer and the wine. After the sacrament, he and Ted bow their heads in silent prayer. Before Lawrence leaves for the last time, he tells Ted what will happen in the execution chamber. The last words, the hood, the straps, the headpiece. Ted almost breaks down weeping. You'll hear a loud noise, says Lawrence. It's just circuits being opened. You won't feel pain. Tears stream down Ted's cheeks. Lawrence puts a hand inside the cell and warmly holds Ted's hand in his. I'd never had my hands held that tight, Lawrence will later say. Lawrence promises Ted that when they throw the switch, he'll be there watching. What he's doing now with his hand around Ted's, he'll be doing with his mind the moment Ted dies. Moments left to live. Ted is led to the execution chamber by a group of guards. Outside, people are partying. Someone is handing out donuts. The camera focuses on a man drunk from celebrating. When he realizes he's being photographed, he proudly stretches the front of his shirt, which says, I like my Ted, well done. It's time. 42 people are sitting on white chairs in the observation room, looking into the execution chamber. Ted, dazed on tranquilizers, arrives in handcuffs wearing blue slacks and a pale blue prison-issue shirt. Ted doesn't know most of the observers, mainly cops, detectives, and journalists. Superintendent Tom Barton asks if Ted has any last words. Looking at his attorney, Jim Coleman, and Pastor Lawrence, he says, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." He's composed but slightly shaking. As Ted sits in the chair, they secure the thick straps around his legs. His wrists, one leg, and his head are shaved, exposing bare skin where the electrodes will be attached. The electrodes are positioned to ensure he'll receive the full blast of 2,000 volts coursing through his body. The room is silent, each second drawing closer to the inevitable. As the straps on the head plate are tightened, there is fear in his face. A phone is in one corner of the room, but Ted hasn't looked at it once. Barton makes a call to Governor Bob Martinez. He hangs up the receiver and nods to the executioner. The executioner hits the switch. In less than 2 minutes, it's over. Silence settles heavily over the room as a paramedic steps forward to check Ted's pulse. Dr. Frank Kilgo appears, removing the hood from Ted's face. His lifeless eyes stare blankly ahead, fixed in one final empty gaze. Kilgo turns to the witnesses, some stunned, others visibly relieved. He's dead. It's exactly 7:16 a.m. Outside, the news spreads like wildfire. He's gone. TV crews begin packing up, their cameras still warm. Journalists head to their cars, their notebooks filled with shorthand scrawls. In terms of viewer numbers, it's been a very good day. Later, a white hearse pulls out of the prison gates. For the roaring crowd, it is the end of the party. For the victims' families, the nightmare never ends. Serial killers in the past have been categorized as organized and disorganized, with the latter kind usually being an uneducated maniac prone to unplanned outbursts of extreme violence. But organized, well, these smart predators plan ahead. Ted Bundy was one of them, as you shall now see. Bundy sometimes went to great lengths in luring his victims. He embraced a number of techniques to evade arrest, and they worked for a long time. He was the quintessential psychopath. He thought he was one step ahead of the cops all the time. You'll hear later how one of his victims managed to get away after he struck. But for the most part, if someone got in the car with Mr. Bundy, they were not long for this world. It's not certain when he first killed. He might have murdered a girl named Anne Marie Burr in 1961 when he was just 14 years old, but that's inconclusive. He always denied he killed that girl. Still, murder was likely on his mind back then. Homicide detectives that worked on his case agreed that Bundy started young, kidnapping and killing in his teens and early 20s. Those were the years when he tried to perfect killing without being caught. He later admitted that he couldn't control his urges, even though he felt some shame. Using the third person, but really talking about himself, he described what it was like to kill or try and kill in those early days. He felt horrified by the recognition that he'd done this, the realization that he had the capacity to do such a thing or even attempt. That's a better word, this kind of thing. He sat back and swore to himself that he wouldn't do something like that again. Bundy also said on tape that he educated himself in getting away with murder by reading those gory detective magazines that were so popular back then. So with a bit of booze to diminish his inhibitions, he was ready to become the complete product, the epitome of the educated killer. He was 27. He knew the time was right. The victim was 18-year-old Karen Sparks. She was a dance student at the University of Washington. On January 4, 1974, Bundy crept into the basement apartment where she was sleeping. Just before dozing off, though, something had frightened her. Many years later, she recalled, "I remember seeing some guy looking at me and thought, gosh, maybe it was just a figment of my imagination because it was so quick." She wasn't imagining things. In fact, she remembered that before she went back to her apartment, she'd been at the laundromat and some guy kept looking at her. When she looked back, he turned his head away. This was most likely Bundy. He'd already become a predator, a kind of human panther that stalks before striking. When he attacked Sparks that night with a metal rod, he did so with so much violence that she should have died. Her injuries were catastrophic, both internal and external. She thinks the only reason Bundy stopped attacking her was that her male roommate in the room next door had talked in his sleep, which he did quite often. Bundy had followed this girl, so he would have known she had male roommates, young men that could have easily overpowered him. He likely knew he was taking a risk. The next victim had to be alone, and this time she had to die. He didn't even wait for an entire month before he struck again. The victim also studied at the University of Washington. Like the first victim, he didn't so much lure her away. But before we get to his social techniques, we want to give you an idea of his modus operandi. The victim was Linda Ann Healy. Bundy entered her room and beat her until she was unconscious as she was sleeping. He then dressed her in a pair of blue jeans and a white blouse, picked her limp body up, and took off. She was discovered missing because that morning at 5:30 a.m. her alarm went off and her roommate noticed that it just kept ringing. Police found blood on her bed and nightgown, but there wasn't much else in terms of forensic evidence. Remember, Bundy at this point thought he was smarter than the cops. He wasn't just addicted to killing, the thrill of the chase afforded him a lot of pleasure. Her skull was later found on a nearby mountain. It would come to light that her apartment was just a few blocks from Bundy's. Again, he had stalked his prey. This time, he made sure there were no burly men staying right next to her. It was then he started employing charm and good looks to find his victims, rather than slaying sleeping women. This time, he went over to the Evergreen State College to hunt. The victim was 19-year-old Donna Gale Manson. He killed those first two women in January and February, and now it was March. It's hard to know the full details about how he lured Manson because of the sad fact that he killed her. Unlike the few survivors that actually talked to Bundy and lived to tell the tale, we can only reconstruct how he manipulated Manson. We know that on March 12th, she stood out in the crowd, wearing a red, orange, and green striped shirt. She was on her way to a jazz concert on campus and she never made it there. In April, he killed again, as if trying to meet a monthly quota. The victim was 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt. It was with her murder that we learned so much more about Bundy's tricks of the trade. There's no doubt that he knew how to come across as a guy people trusted. In junior high school, he sold Christmas tree lights to earn some extra cash. A fellow student from back then recalled, "Ted was the best damn Christmas light salesman I've ever seen." He must have used his cool and calm demeanor to abduct Miss Rancourt. She'd been at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg and went missing on her way back to her dorm. What happened exactly, we don't know. But we know that Bundy had previously tried to unsuccessfully pick up other girls at the same college. One of them was 21-year-old Kathleen Clara D'Olivio. She told police that she saw Bundy struggling to carry a bag of books. His arm was in a sling, and his hand had a splint on it, which is why he was struggling. She stopped and asked him if he was on his way to the library, and he said, "Yes, can you please help me?" Notably, when she chatted with him, she never turned her back to him. Usually, as soon as that happened, he would strike his victim over the head, rendering them unconscious. Bundy had dropped a bunch of books and was hopelessly trying to pick them up. D'Olivio later told detectives we started walking, and when we came to a bridge, it was obvious that he wasn't going to go to the library. He then said his car was close by. She saw that he had a brown Volkswagen Beetle. Feeling somewhat suspicious of him, she still helped him carry his books to the car. She then thought she'd done enough, put the books down, and started to walk off. He subsequently called after her, saying he had dropped his car keys and he couldn't get to him. He asked her for help. She told the cops I was cautious at the time. I mean, even while we were walking, I thought, well, I'm not going to let him get behind me. I'm going to keep an eye on him. She did help him look for his keys, but erring on the side of caution, she said they both should step back and look under the car, rather than bend down in front of him. She outsmarted Bundy right then. They spotted the keys together, and she walked away shouting behind her, "Good luck with your arm." He must have been furious that some girl had seen right through him, or at least been cautious enough to consider that he might be a sketchy dude. It wasn't the only time he failed to get his prey on that campus. He also tried with a young woman named Jane Curtis. She later told detectives that the man she met was good looking, not someone she thought was freaky or creepy. He looked like a guy you could trust, a wholesome, educated type. She said she bumped into him at about 9 p.m. near the library. She told detectives he had this huge stack of books, like 8 or 9 books, and he had a cast on his left arm. All of a sudden, he kind of drops them right in the direction I was walking in. She offered to help this injured, handsome fella and politely told her how grateful he was. The two then started walking as they were going in the same direction. She was carrying a bunch of books. She later recalled, "He looked at me strangely. His eyes seemed weird." That's because he was looking at someone he thought he was about to kill. He was looking through her, already imagining all the warped things he would do to her dead body. She also noticed that he had a splint over some of his fingers. He told her that he'd been injured in a skiing accident. You see, Bundy made himself look vulnerable for 2 reasons. One, he knew young women would come to his aid, especially because he was well-spoken and soft on the eyes. 2, a man with a splint and a cast immediately says to a woman that he poses no physical threat. But Bundy operated with more manipulation than that. He could have easily said he had hurt his fingers while building a deck on his house, or when he lifted some weights, or when he was fixing a shelf. But those things he knew very well come across as a bit working class, a bit too masculine. He said skiing because that's what the well-to-do folks enjoy in their free time. Serial killers don't ski, at least in the minds of most people. Back then, the public seemed to labor under the misapprehension that killers should look deranged and walk around with tattoos and shaggy beards. Bundy even drove a feminine kind of car, perhaps the cutest car on the market. He was gaming the public's ignorance, and to some extent, he got one over on the cops too. But he didn't outsmart Curtis. She later told police that little metal thing over his finger looked like it had just been taped on. Still, she walked over to his car, and it was then he told her to open the passenger door because he couldn't do it with his arm the way it was. She refused to open it, so he did. The first thing she noticed was that the passenger seat was missing. That was because it was easier to push an unconscious woman into the car and she wouldn't be seen. Curtis said the missing seat really bothered her. Something was just not right about the guy. She told detectives, "I had the books in my hand," and he said, "Get in." I said, "What?" He said, "Get in and start the car for me." I said, "Oh, I can't." He wanted me to get in through the passenger side. Noticing her suspicion, Bundy started to pretend that his arm was suddenly causing him a lot of pain. She'd seen enough, though. She left him grabbing his fake broken arm. When she was out of sight, Bundy got in the car and threw off the cast. Again, he must have been furious. Narcissistic psychopaths don't like to be owned. Unfortunately, Miss Manson fell into his trap. Maybe she turned her back on him. Maybe she walked for a while with his books. Maybe she fell for the missing key ruse. We'll never know, but she fell for something. Even though Bundy had failed on occasions, he was smart enough to learn from his failures and was like a killing machine, a machine learning algorithm that gets better each time it kills. Like an algorithm, Bundy felt no remorse. The only important thing was succeeding. We know he kept using that fake sling ruse because when young women went missing, people reported to police that they'd seen a man with his arm in a sling. Some witnesses also saw a Volkswagen Beetle nearby. On top of that, the sketches of this man police made were very close to what Bundy looked like. He wasn't just smart, he was also exceptionally confident. After he'd killed one woman, he went back to the scene of the crime to collect some of her belongings. Police were still everywhere, and he walked right into a crime scene. A detective later said it was a feat so brazen that it astonishes police even today. This was another reason how he got away with so many crimes. He knew his demeanor made him invisible, rather like the character in the book American Psycho. Hide in plain sight must have been his motto. But he changed his system up a bit. On other occasions, he swapped the arm in his sling for crutches. A man that couldn't even walk right was way less of a danger than someone with a useless arm. He also carried a briefcase at times because, hey, killers don't walk around with briefcases. This is reminiscent of an educated British drug smuggler who became the first foreigner ever to break out of one of Thailand's worst prisons. Once he got over the wall, he opened up an umbrella. Getting the umbrella over with him was very hard, but it was worth the trouble. When he was asked why he did it, he replied, "Because escaped prisoners don't use umbrellas." Bundy was an expert at exploiting people's preconceptions. Moreover, when he told people he worked for the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission, who could believe he was a killer? It was true, too. He actually wrote a booklet aimed at women when discussing how to avoid dangerous men. His temerity knew no bounds. Time and again, he lured women to his car. One time in broad daylight. That day, he wore a tennis outfit because, again, what kind of killer looks like he could almost pass as Jimmy Connors? Bundy also moved around a fair bit, which made police work across states very hard before massive computer databases came into existence. He was well aware of what we now call linkage blindness. That's when crimes are not connected. He became a law student, which was a great pickup line, especially when he had those good looks, too. Many people who met Bundy on a night out were literally charmed to death. They only really became his lovers after they were dead. Still, Bundy often returned to his tried and tested being injured canard. If it's not broken, why fix it, he might have told himself. One time in Colorado, he approached a victim on crutches and asked her to help him carry his heavy ski boots. She was dead soon after. He dumped her and went back to her decomposed body 6 weeks later. There was one exception, though. The only woman who ever got in his car and actually survived. This was nothing short of miraculous. Like waking up next to a lion only to find it's cooked you breakfast and put your phone on charge. Her name was Carol DeRanch. She was in a shopping mall in Salt Lake City, Utah, when a good-looking, smartly dressed man walked up to her. He introduced himself as a detective and said he needed to know her car license number. Bundy, sly as ever, started looking around the mall. He told the woman he was just trying to see where his partner was. She fell for it. He told her there'd been quite a few car break-ins down at the mall car park. Would she go down to the car park with him just so he could ascertain if she'd been one of the victims? Phew, she thought, when the two realized her car had been left alone. But Bundy said he still had to file a report. It was just a few minutes' drive to the station. He said she could go with him in his car, although she became somewhat suspicious when she saw the police car was actually a Volkswagen Beetle. Beetle in name, Beetle in nature. What kind of cop drives such a slow car, she thought. Unfortunately, DeRanch was quite a naive person. She had not seen the ways of the world, having grown up in a rural Mormon community. Her parents had always told her to show the utmost respect toward authority figures. She did. However, she still thinks the Beetle was a bit weird, and that's why she asked Bundy to show some ID. Yet again, the psycho was able to think on his feet. He quickly flashed his wallet up to her eyes, and she didn't have the confidence to tell him she didn't really see much. She got in the car. Bundy said, "Strap up," and that's when she smelled booze on him. Now things really didn't seem right. When they were alone on a quiet road, Bundy stopped the car. Derange was now scared. She could still smell the alcohol vapors wafting around the car. For a moment, there was an awkward silence as Bundy just looked forward through the windshield. He then turned on her, snarling as he did. He clipped on some handcuffs, only in his hastiness he fastened them onto the same hand. Derange tried to get out of the car, at which point Bundy smacked her on the back of the head with a crowbar. She screamed, punched, kicked out, landing a blow right in Bundy's fiendish face. Derange got out of the car and left the bloodied Bundy in her dust. One thing she told police later was that he hardly said a word to her while they were driving. When being interviewed in prison, Bundy explained why he was a man of few words when it came to his victims. He said he never wanted to know any personal details about them. That was because it was hard to kill someone once they became a little too real. This wasn't about empathy, but the fact that them becoming real would wreck his fantasy. According to some experts on serial killers, if you ever find yourself up close and trapped by one of them, start talking and make sure you become as real as can be. It probably won't work, but it's about the best chance you'll have. The year is 2024. My name is Annie, and I'm the roommate of Theodore Ted Bundy. In this video today, you'll learn all about Ted's personality. As much as he can be known for such a secretive and deceptive man, you'll also hear how Mr. Bundy struggles with modern law enforcement techniques, surveillance technology, and how he manages to navigate today's progressive environment as a man who could be said to be the least progressive human in modern history, the epitome of so-called male toxicity. With this in mind, you might not be surprised to learn that in 2024, Ted is an outspoken advocate of the women's rights movement. That's how I, Annie, got to know Ted. We both worked on a crisis hotline together where Ted spoke for hours, helping people, mostly women, in their time of need. Ted was always friendly to me and seemed caring, so when he suggested we share an apartment, I agreed. I'm a former cop, and Ted studies psychology at the University of Washington. Naturally, we both have lots to talk about. He's usually very open with me. He's told me all about his illegitimate birth when his mother Louise fell pregnant when she was just 16. Ted told me Louise was embarrassed and lied to him, making him believe his grandparents were his parents and she was his sister. Ted adored his grandfather, but not so much his grandmother, who spent much of her life struggling with severe depression. For that reason and more, Ted soon went off to live with his sister/mother. Later, Louise met a cook named Johnny Bundy, a short man standing no higher than 5 feet. The two got married. Ted thought he was attending the marriage of his sister, but somewhere deep inside, he knew he was being lied to. Louise and Johnny had 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. The eldest was born when Ted was already 15 years old. That one, a boy, was Ted's favorite. Ted hardly ever complained when he had to miss out on activities with his school friends because he had to babysit the kids. He liked his half-siblings very much. He still does. Ted told me in school he wasn't a bad student. He got a B average. He was okay at sports, showing some potential in the low hurdles. Still, he often hated gym class, especially in junior high, when he was very skinny and the boys would bully him when he insisted he wouldn't take a shower with the rest of the class. Ted was embarrassed about his naked body. He fared better in high school, where he made friends with Jim, who was active in student politics. Ted was then filling out a bit. He was attractive, his grades were good. He loved skiing, but he was desperate to impress people. When he got to college, he chose to study Chinese so that he could impress people with his language skills. One of those people was Stephanie. Ted fell for Stephanie in a big way. He once said the love he felt for her was sublime and overpowering. He told me he'd never forget the first touch of hands, the first kiss, the first night together. It was bliss for Ted. But Stephanie came from a well-to-do family in California, and being a year older than Ted, she expected a lot of him. She was hardly impressed when he started working as a busboy at a yacht club so he could get through college. She was less impressed when he started working at a Safeway store stocking the shelves. He never lasted long in those jobs. He couldn't resist stealing things. This was not a man Stephanie could imagine marrying, and unlike most young women these days, she wanted a husband early in life. Her family demanded she find a suitable man, and that wasn't Ted Bundy. It just wasn't the crappy jobs. He lied to her a lot. He was always pretending to be something he wasn't. His Tinder profile, which he kept live even when he was with Stephanie, was that of a narcissist. He came across as grandiose and charming, but most of all, he tried to look caring and charitable. He'd gone to an animal shelter just to take a photo of himself with an injured dog. Below he wrote, "My pet hates men who hurt animals and women. I know that sounds cheesy, but I don't care." In another video, he was playing with a girl, his younger sister. He'd arranged to take her to the park just to get that photo, making sure in the photo you could just about see he was wearing a Rolex watch. It was actually a fake. He'd purchased it on the Chinese e-commerce website Lazada. Stephanie saw through all this fakery and she dumped him. He was devastated. She was too rich, too pretty, too confident to be with a man like Ted. He knew this, but he didn't want to accept it. There was a reason she kept his identity from her social media accounts. The two never appeared in photos together. Her Facebook relationship setting never changed from single. This made him murderously upset. And then when he found his birth certificate and came across the truth about his birth, he was even more devastated. That's the Ted I met, a damaged man who told me he loved his mother, and despite what Stephanie had done to him, he said he still had a profound love for her and would respect her autonomy by not hassling her. What a guy, I thought. I wished more men were like him. When I met Ted, he was quite a successful psychology major. He showed me a letter his professor had written about him. It said, "Mr. Bundy is undoubtedly one of my top undergraduate students. I would place him in the 1%. He conducts himself like a young professional." By this time, he'd already dabbled in working in politics, helping out on the campaign trail for a Republican politician he liked dearly. He'd also already met Liz, a woman the opposite of Stephanie, with a young child named Molly. Liz lacked confidence, money, and good looks. She adored Ted, who became almost like a father to Molly. That's how things were when Ted met me at the crisis hotline. Ted is a conservative at heart, he told me. He believes in family values. He believes in protecting women, who he says should settle down rather than play the field. He knows that's old-fashioned for 2024, but he says at heart all women want to love and be loved by a strong, dependable man. He says women are different from men. They're vulnerable, he says. There are bad men out there in this world. He tells me that about 3 times a week. Ted's an upstanding member of the community. Not long ago, he received a recommendation from the Seattle Police Department after he bravely ran down a phone snatcher in the street. He even got on the local newspaper's social media page. His face was plastered all over Facebook. The newspaper wrote, "Ted Bundy, 26, caught a man who had snatched a woman's phone in the Northgate Mall parking area Monday night. Police said Bundy chased the man on foot in 1st Avenue Northeast and caught him as he was stuffing the phone into a garbage can." Later at Green Lake in northern Seattle, Ted jumped in the water and saved a 3-year-old from drowning. The whole thing was caught on video, which was later criticized because a group of people filmed and did nothing. That's modern life for you, but Ted is different. Fully clothed, iPhone in his pocket, he jumped in and dragged her out as everyone else watched. Ted is now a hero to the 2,000-plus friends he has on Facebook and the many followers in his Instagram account. He told me he stays away from X, formerly known as Twitter, due to the prevalence of misogyny on the platform. I disagreed with him, but Ted said I don't know what men are really like. X, he says, is a cesspit of toxicity. Good guys, he says, use Facebook and Instagram. Ted told me he thinks there's too much toxicity in the world, which is why he wrote a paper he published on his social media accounts titled The Why Factor: How Most Men Don't Realize They're Toxic. I wouldn't call him an activist. He's not keen on activist types, but man, he's active online. He once told me he feels more suited to life online, where he feels he can truly be himself. He's a great guy at home, too. Not long ago, he took Liz and Molly to Crescent Lake, close to Washington's Gig Harbor, where he later posted photos of the 3 camping, sailing, and rafting. To look at his socials, you'd think a man couldn't be more perfect. He has the perfect life. He's not vain, though. He told me he's hardly ever in the photos because he doesn't want it all to be about him. What a guy. I only work a 4-hour shift at the hotline 1 day a week, but Ted does 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. shifts several times a week on the work-study program. All we're asked is to be good listeners. We should be empathetic. When it comes to talking someone out of a crisis, Ted excels. He has literally saved many lives. He sounds genuinely caring as he listens for sometimes hours on end to people's problems. Ted knows how to talk to women, which he said helps with the rest of his life. He's listened to me for hours on end as I've told them about my failing relationships, the fact that I split up with my husband right after he'd been diagnosed as having a deadly skin cancer. Ted advised me not to go back just because my husband was sick. Being good has its limits, he told me. One night, Ted sent me a meme. It was a picture of a kitten clinging onto a rope, and below it said, "When you get to the end of a rope, tie a knot and hang on." He's such a darling. I thought at times if this good-looking young man, strong as a whip, weren't just a bit older, he'd be ideal for me. I have to admit I'd often entertained the idea of sharing a bed with Ted. I guess some lucky woman will one day get him. He also really is interested in my former job as a cop. Working at the hotline, we already get to know a lot of insider information as to how law enforcement works, but Ted never gets tired of asking me about how things work in the police. I've shared a lot of information with Ted about the cases I worked on and how we caught the criminals. In police speak, he's what we'd call very forensically aware. This is great because he can advise women on how to stay safe. Ted's barely ever home, though. The other day, I thought he'd been at the crisis center throughout the night, but someone later told me he didn't work that particular shift. When I asked him about it, trying not to sound too prying, He said he sometimes likes to drive all around all night just to think about the state of the world and how he can make things better. Then the other night I woke up and he was in my room, standing above me, just staring at me. Have to admit, I was shocked seeing his dark shadow looking down at me. He told me it's just that he feels he should take care of me. I don't want anything bad to ever happen to you, he said. It's true. Every time I leave the crisis center alone in the middle of the night, I can see him standing at the window watching me get to my car. You can't be too careful, he likes to say. I was even more impressed when he told me he landed a position at Seattle's Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. It seems all that studying crime and criminals paid off. He told me he'd be working on a pamphlet to advise women to stay safe and had been asked by the Department of Emergency Services to help find missing women. He said he'll start a Facebook page dedicated to such women where the public can access details and provide information. He's started drinking quite a lot lately. Maybe listening to women's problems all the time is hard work. I know he started dating Stephanie again, but he didn't want to discuss it. What's weird is she found me on Facebook and told me he just dumped her out of the blue. She told me he changed so completely. I escaped through the skin of my teeth. When I think about how cold and calculating he is, it makes me shudder. I just couldn't see that. He's been so good to me. So I just sent her a thumbs up emoji. The last thing she said was, "Be careful, be very careful. You don't know the man living with you." My immediate thought was, "You spoiled, privileged brat. Ted's too good for you." I must admit, I'm starting to wonder why he seems obsessed with serial killer shows. Often when I get home, if he's in, of course, which he often isn't, he's watching Netflix. The other day I found him watching Conversations with the Killer Jeffrey Dahmer tapes. I asked him how it was. He didn't comment on the ghastly crimes, he just said, "That guy was a total loser." I asked why, and he just said, "Don't poop where you eat." That seemed out of character for Ted, but I guess I misunderstood what he meant by that. He told me he just binged Conversations with the Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, and when I asked him about that, his reply was, well, Gacy was superior to Dahmer in that he created an impressive, clever routine, but he wasn't forensically aware. I replied, awful man, and he kinda did a double take and said, oh yeah, he was brutal, just brutal. I must say, I was even more concerned about his behavior the other day. I got home and he was asleep on the sofa, an empty bottle of vodka lying on the carpet. I went into his room to grab a pillow, and on his bed were a tire iron and what looked like a pair of women's stockings. There was a lot I didn't know about Ted Bundy. Stephanie was right, I didn't know the man I was living with. Now let me tell you about the other Ted Bundy. Unbeknownst to me, he prowls around the University of Washington, UW, when he's out at night. He studies girls' movements, paying particular attention to the ones he sees go out and return to their dorms alone. He does this with the dedication of a detective staking out a house. Thanks to his work on missing women and what he's learned from the Crime Prevention Advisory Commission, plus what I've told him, Ted knows all about vulnerability, of victims as well as of perpetrators. Linda was 21 when she crossed the path of Ted. On a cold day in February, she wrote an email to her friend saying she was wrapped up in her Afghan sweater in her dorm room, intermittently studying and napping. She told her buddy she was thinking about making beef stroganoff. She wrote in the email, "I've been doing a lot of skiing, some working and some studying, but not necessarily in that order." Later that night, Linda went to a bar with two friends. They shared 2 pitchers of beer while taking selfies of themselves and putting the photos on their social media accounts. Since Linda's Facebook account is set to public, Ted's been reading her posts. Finding her was easy. He just searched for the bar that she'd tagged in one of her photos. In one of her latest posts, she wrote, "Bored, home alone. Anyone want to cheer me up?" Ted smiled, thinking this is just too easy. On the night she went missing, she got home to her room and spent about an hour messaging her ex. That was the last time anyone heard from Linda again. How someone can just disappear is surprising in today's hyper-surveilled world, but not so much when you consider the recent protests at UW. Ted has been watching the student protests over the last few months regarding what the students have said is an individual right to be free from the invasion of privacy. The university's video surveillance and recording system administrative policy has been under fire. The students, well, some of them, have said there's too much police presence on campus. Since then, student activists have smashed or covered many of the university cameras. One student actually started a website with a map of all the cameras, a site Ted has taken a lot of interest in. Detectives were alerted to Linda going missing by her friends. They went into her dorm room and pulled back her bed sheets, where they found bloodstains. The blood had seeped through all the way to her mattress. It seemed obvious that someone had attacked her in her bed. Her friends told investigators that Linda always made her bed by pulling the sheets above her pillow, but when they saw the bed, whoever had made it hadn't done that. Police then found her nightdress in the closet. The neck was stained with dried blood. Her backpack was also missing, but her phone was there. The cops assumed someone beat her unconscious in her room and then took her away. They checked the CCTV recordings only to discover, to their dismay, that most of the cameras had been rendered useless by being painted over. Since the protests started, cameras all over the university have been covered with stickers depicting the eye from George Orwell's dystopian masterpiece, 1984. Later, police received a call from someone who wanted to remain anonymous. "Listen," said the caller, "the guy who attacked that girl was seen on campus." Over the next few days, detectives tried to interview students to find out if a man had been seen, but the Seattle police at this point in time were not very popular on campus. They got little help. One day, someone scrawled "pigs" on their unmarked car. They did hear, though, that a guy on crutches had been seen hanging around. They just didn't have the video evidence. But for the most part, the students were worried out of their minds. This surely was a murder case, which shouldn't happen in 2024 right on campus. Saying that, in 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were brutally stabbed to death in a house close to campus. Still, it wasn't long until a criminology PhD student at the nearby Washington State University was arrested and charged. If the police are disliked at the University of Washington, they are more disliked at Evergreen State College. Here, they're despised by quite a number of student activists whose calls for less policing in the face of oppression have led to a dwindling of their numbers on campus. This is the ideal environment for Ted Bundy. Just months after Ted murdered Linda, he found a victim at Evergreen. She was 19 years old and was currently working on a thesis titled "More White Than Black: Is Color Inequality in the Panda Bear Intrinsic Racism? A Reverse Zoonotic Contagion of 21st Century Intersectional Oppression." Again, Ted followed this girl on social media, where she was very active. He found her easily because she was on his own page on women's safety. On the night of her murder, she arranged to go to a jazz concert. Her friends later said she changed her clothes quite a few times before choosing an outfit she was comfortable with. She posted a photo of herself dressed up like this on Facebook before leaving the house, and within 10 minutes had received at least 48 likes. Ted almost hit like, but thought better of it. Like Linda, she seemed to just disappear into thin air. Ted had earlier asked one girl to help him take his books to a beat-up vintage VW Beetle. He then told her he'd dropped his car keys. He gave her a look as if to say, "Please pick them up for me." She refused and walked away. Police later discovered that his car had been parked in a CCTV blind spot, and the camera that should have spotted it had been covered with one of those 1984 stickers. Another thing she noticed on the windscreen of the car was a disabled sticker, something Ted had purchased online. Ted had been using every trick in the book to take advantage of people's compassion for the struggles of certain groups that may face hardships, including the disabled. He recently purchased a couple of t-shirts that said "Cure Ableism." Ted realized that the crutches just wouldn't cut it, believing they wouldn't garner enough sympathy, especially given all his perceived advantages. He soon decided to up the ante and pretend that he had a lifetime disability. Ted believed he was ahead of the curve. Despite the widespread antipathy toward police on university campuses, after Ted killed an 18-year-old girl named Susan, the collective mood changed. Many students were unhappy that the cameras had been destroyed. They called for more police presence. Susan, who was a biology student with ambitions to become a doctor one day, was a hard-working young woman. She'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through college with her own money. She was always active, spending some of her free time learning Brazilian jiu-jitsu. She might have only been 5'2" and 120 pounds, but she was fit and tough. On the day she went missing, she jogged in the morning, taken a jiu-jitsu class in the afternoon, and after some study did her laundry in the evening, after which she was going to head to an advisor's meeting. Her plan for relaxation that night was to see a new German movie right after she dried her clothes. But the friends she was meant to see that movie with waited and waited. Meanwhile, her clothes sat in the dryer. Susan's friends soon grew suspicious. She was not the kind of girl to stand up a buddy, and when she didn't get back to her dorm that evening, something she'd usually never do without telling someone, the alarm was raised. The campus police were soon on the case. Notably, Susan and her friends were not the activist type. They'd been furious about the CCTV cameras being stickered over and smashed. With the help of her friends, police realized that for Susan to get back to her dorm, she would have had to walk through a construction area and then walk across a small bridge over a pond. She would have then had to pass under a railroad trestle, which was quite a dark area despite being near a student car park. One of the cops told Susan's friend if someone watched her, followed her, and meant to grab her, it would have been here under the trestle. He added, "It's dark as hell for about 20 feet. Police knew about her martial arts experience. They knew from her friends that she'd been carrying a load of papers. Had anyone tried to grab her, not only would there probably have been a fight and screams, but there should have been papers scattered everywhere. Someone, they thought, must have taken advantage of her bad eyesight and knocked her clean out before she had time to think. Then a witness came forward saying she'd seen a young, handsome man hanging around close to the library. This guy, she said, had walked in a way to make her think he might have had a disability. Other people came forward saying they'd also seen this same guy, who they said seemed to be having problems carrying his books. Now police had heard this story again. They also heard that guy's car, a Beetle, was missing the front passenger seat. This should have been an easy case to crack, but again, there was no video evidence of the man in his car. It seemed as though he knew exactly where the CCTV blind spots were. On top of that, police found zero forensic evidence, not even a footprint where they believed Susan had been attacked. They at least had some clear descriptions of his face and build. They put that into a database where artificial intelligence tried to match it with known criminals. They also used facial recognition technology, something most students didn't even know was used in the state of Washington, to pull up any faces on university cameras that were linked to past crimes. Ted, of course, was aware all these procedures were going to happen. He knew exactly every step of the police process when people went missing. The truth is, Ted had walked up behind Susan and hit her very hard on the back of her head with an iron bar. This knocked her out and fractured her skull. He did this where he knew there were no cameras, and he parked his car nearby, where he'd be able to innocently merge with traffic. He'd sold his Beetle by then, doing a cash deal out of state with an old guy that collected vintage cars. Ted took her body to the woods close to Taylor Mountain. Later, he returned to her, where he indulged in a twisted perversion, combing her hair and stroking her face. She was his. She was his forever. This was starting to look very bad for the police. These victims, all pretty, all young, all fairly successful middle-class students, and all Caucasian, compelled the police to believe the suspect had a certain kind of victim in mind. While police didn't say this, social media was soon talking about a killer who hunted privileged young women in Washington. What ensued were countless arguments about race issues and police funding issues, and it seemed as though the victims themselves were unimportant at the side of what was becoming a heated political argument. This suited Ted, who on his own Facebook page started writing long threads about safety. He wrote a list of the things women should do to protect themselves and penned an essay on male violence titled The Y Factor Part 2: How to Survive in a Man's World. For Ted, the sexual aspect of his murders wasn't the only thing he got off on. His other great pleasure was pulling the wool over people's eyes. He earned another commendation for his paper, and his social media following grew in size. When he was in the apartment with me, all he talked about were these victims and the responsibility he said he had to help women. He even cried one night, and I believe he was genuinely cut up about these missing girls. If they'd only listened to my advice, he told me, they'd be safe. I didn't think too much about the fact he always had surgical gloves lying around, which he said he needed to build his plaster of Paris models. It's true he always had plaster of Paris in the apartment. I wasn't suspicious about the fact that he had special covers for his shoes, hairnets, or that he always seemed to have to bleach the house. When he grew a beard and sold his car again, I just thought he wanted to change. Ted seemed like the most compassionate man in the world. He always listened intently to my problems. He literally wouldn't hurt a fly, and by literally I mean that the other week, I had some friends over at the apartment and there was a fly buzzing around the kitchen. My friend Janet picked up a rolled newspaper, and when she was about to smack the fly as it landed on the table, Ted pounced into action, throwing his arms in the way, saying, "Don't kill it, don't kill it." He told Janet everything deserves a life, even a humble fly. Janet later called him a wimp. Good looking, she said, but a total utter wimp. Ted was frustrated at this point. Little did I know it was because he could no longer act on his compulsion to kill. The universities had been busy cleaning and fixing their surveillance cameras. People were no longer unfriendly to the police. Forums were bursting with theories as to who this student killer was. That's all people talked about online, which became a hugely polarized argument. Hardly any female student walked around alone at night anymore. Every single strange man, anyone just hanging around, was videoed and outed on social media. Some guy even got beat up just because he was hanging around in the dark one night close to the campus library waiting for his girlfriend. This too became a political argument, something Ted saw and took much pleasure from. But he had to change things up. He was now addicted to killing, and the bodies he'd hidden and returned to were far too decomposed to be intimate with. He needed new victims. He waited for a warm July day with clear blue skies, when Americans in large numbers were heading to parks. Ted himself headed to Lake Sammamish State Park, a 512-acre nature tract in King County, Washington State. While often very busy on warm days, Ted was aware that young people would often choose the most secluded parts of the park to drink and make out. Ted's plan was to dress up in expensive leisure wear, to look about as handsome as he could, and invite a young woman, or possibly two young women, without male companions of course, to go sailing on his boat and be models for a video he would post on his Instagram account. He'd tell them he was a well-known influencer. Ted looked the part, having stolen a pair of Louis Vuitton Beverly Hills sneakers that retailed at almost $2,000. He'd also stolen a white Versace Greca polo t-shirt with matching white shorts. that would have cost in the region of $1,500. He'd stolen them from a guy at his local gym. Ted believed if he looked rich, people would trust him. He was a big fan of the movie American Psycho. But his ruse at the park didn't work. The girls he approached saw right through him. He'd underestimated them and soon found out that not everyone is impressed with wealth or popularity he pretended he had in the digital sphere. He gave up after a while, knowing that he'd likely be in the background of many people's videos and photographs already. Ted was beginning to understand that getting away with murder in 2024 was not easy. He was becoming desperate, and desperate killers make mistakes. Ted was about to become less of an organized serial killer and more of a disorganized killer. When serial killers make the switch, they often do so out of desperation, and they tend to get caught. Ted could, of course, kill poor women, women working the streets, and while he'd no doubt get away with that, such women didn't satiate his needs. One night, Ted told me he was moving out. He said he wanted to go to Utah to study law. I said I'd help him move when the time came. He soon found an apartment in Salt Lake City, and because of his work in public safety, he landed a job as a night manager at the University of Utah Law School campus. He was immediately liked and trusted by the staff and students, so much so that he soon got the job of security officer, partly on the back of his digital public safety campaigns. He told me on the phone that he was still with Liz, but he admitted he'd been dating a string of different women through Tinder. I believed him. He once showed me how many messages he had on Tinder, and I couldn't quite believe my eyes. Ted was immensely popular. He was what you might call the ideal modern man. He began killing less than a month after starting college, strangling a hitchhiker to death and later picking up a girl he found walking down a dark street at night. With both these women, he returned to the bodies, even taking photographs of them. His new modus operandi was to drive around and wait until he saw someone walking in an area where there would likely be no cameras, no people, no passing cars. His third victim in a row, 17-year-old Melissa, the daughter of the police chief outside Salt Lake City, had just gone for pizza with her friends when Ted drove past her. He strangled her so hard with her own stocking that her hyoid bone was fractured when people found her body 9 days later. On Halloween night, 17-year-old Laura made the same mistake, walking alone at night. It was after midnight when Ted, sounding impeccable as usual and dressed smart, picked her up. With both these girls, Ted returned to their bodies and shampooed their hair. When some hitchhikers found her 20 days later, what they saw was a young girl who'd been viciously beaten and strangled, although by this time her body was quite decomposed. Her distraught father was only able to identify her by the scars on her arms, a consequence of a horse throwing her into a barbed wire fence when she was 11. In both cases, police believed the victims had been hit with a heavy rod, perhaps a tire iron. They said whoever killed these girls had been able to gain their trust. This killer, they believed, was likely a disarming-looking gent, someone who looked like an upstanding member of the community. They didn't know these murders were related to the Washington student murders, but the AI they used connected them, stating there was a 39.7% chance they were the same man. The AI, using some complicated machine learning technology, even generated an image of the man. Unbelievably, it kinda looked like Ted. Ted was about to meet his match. He was motivated by trickery, which is why he'd logged into the dark web one night and bought himself a police ID and a badge. They were perfect replicas, and Ted had even been able to get the supplier to make them look like they belonged to Utah police. He went by the name of Officer Roseland. With his new ID and his plainclothes policeman look, he headed out, waiting until a local shopping mall in Midvale was about to close and was almost empty. He pulled his car up near the mall, now a regular Toyota with dark-tinted windows. He'd earlier learned online what kind of cars are the most bland and forgettable. The internet hosted a wealth of information for a killer. It was almost an endless resource for Ted. He'd even managed to buy a police scanner that picks up radio frequencies, as well as a fake license plate, all bought on the dark web. He'd also acquired a new device that he could use to more easily detect cameras, hidden or not hidden. Ted's ideal victim, he believed, was a good Mormon girl, the type of girl who respected authority. Ted scanned the area for CCTV, parking his car in an ideal place around the corner from the parking lot. He was wearing a fake mustache and translucent skin-colored surgical gloves. Then he saw her, an 18-year-old girl he learned was named Carol. He could tell by her clothes she was very likely from a strict Mormon family. As she neared her car in the parking lot, Ted approached. "Hi," he said. He pulled out his badge and told her he had a reason to believe there could be stolen goods in her car. She'd been seen on the mall CCTV, possibly stealing from a store. Ted would like to check the car. Carol didn't think much about why a plainclothes cop would be working at a shopping mall chasing thieves. As Ted had guessed, she feared authority figures. She didn't want to get in trouble with her parents. She knew she hadn't stolen anything anyway. When she opened the car door, she told Ted he was free to check inside. "Wait," he told her. He walked away for a second and talked into his phone. He then returned and asked her surname, to which she replied, "Derange." He said, "Miss Derange, I'd like you to accompany me back to the police station. You're not under arrest, but we believe you may be involved in a crime that was committed in this mall earlier today." "I've only been here about 30 minutes, she protested. Ted said, "It'll only take a few minutes. If you have to call your parents, you can call them from the station." She thought about getting her parents involved. "Okay," she said, "if it's just a few minutes." But as soon as she got into Ted's car, she noticed a strong smell of alcohol. She became more suspicious when she heard the lock on her door click shut. He then pulled away from the mall, but not in the direction where she knew the police station to be. He just ignored her when she asked where he was taking her. On a quiet street close to a school, he pulled over. He was still silent. He was no longer smiling. He slowly turned to face her. What stared back at her was a kind of evil she'd been learning about her whole life. No sooner than she tried to open the door, he slapped a handcuff on her. She screamed as he tried to get the second cuff on. That's when she punched him in the face and scratched at his cheeks and eyes like a wild animal. He pulled out a gun and pointed at her, saying, "If you don't stop, I'll shoot you right now." She managed to sit back and kick him right in the chin. Just then, the door partly opened. She was half outside the car when he came at her with a tire iron. She kicked him in the testicles, which bent him double and gave her the opportunity to run. As she heard tires screech behind her, she kept on running, not knowing that Ted had gone in the other direction rather than gave chase. As soon as Carol got to a main road, she ran out in front of a car. Driving was an old couple who, to say the least, were shocked that a young girl with a handcuff swinging from her wrist was screaming at them to let her in. The couple half expected this to be some kind of YouTube video prank, but it wasn't. This girl was in shock. She also became viral when the old couple posted their car cam footage on TikTok. Ted was furious. He'd felt the cut down his cheek. That meant his DNA was under the girl's fingernails. But in his fury, he felt the urge to carry on. He soon found himself outside a school auditorium. He peeked inside. There must have been 1,500 people in there watching a play, and about 1,000 of them had their phones pointing at the stage. But the school corridors were quiet. A student, seemingly in a rush, walked in his direction. Instead of letting her walk past, he stood in front of her. She was tiny compared to him. "I've had my eye on you," he told her. "I know you have time to come outside." She tried to squeeze past, but he blocked her path and creepily said, "You have such nice hair." "I've got to get back to the play," she told him. "You're blocking my way." He produced the police badge and told her he had a reason to believe her car had been stolen. "Get out of the way," she shouted, pushing Ted away. Young people, he thought, feeling outraged at the girl's brazen impudence. "They have no respect for authorities these days," he muttered. Inside the auditorium, young Deborah was telling her parents she was going to pick up her brother at the ice skating rink. "Don't be too late getting back," they replied. "You might still be able to catch the end." Her parents would never see her again. No one would ever see her again. Houses near the school will later report hearing screams from the parking lot. Debbie's brother will get bored of waiting and decide to go to the nearby bowling alley. He'll wait a couple of hours and then start to get worried. Debbie's parents leave the play and see their car is still in the car park. At the foot of the car door, they'll find a key. But where is Debbie? She was supposed to pick up her brother and return immediately. When the parents turned up at the police department, Carol Derange had just left. The handcuffs she was wearing were placed in an evidence bag. The key Ted dropped when he was trying to handcuff Debbie will fit them. Ted's time as a serial killer was coming to an end. His face had been caught on camera at the school. Many people had seen him. His appearance had been described by countless women in Seattle, most of whom said that they were sure they'd seen this guy before, just not realizing they might have seen his face online. His Toyota had been seen too, which was soon sought after. Officer Haywood of the Utah Highway Patrol spotted the car in Granger, a Salt Lake City suburb. Haywood had watched Ted cruising around a residential area in his Toyota during the pre-dawn hours. Ted fled at high speed after seeing the patrol car, but soon gave up, knowing it was futile. Haywood noted the car's front passenger seat had been removed and placed on the rear seats. He found a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items initially assumed to be burglary tools. Ted told Haywood he'd just been to see the new Marvel movie at the theater. Haywood looked at his ID, Theodore Robert Bundy, 565 First Avenue, Salt Lake City, Utah. This all looked very suspicious, so Ted was brought in. In a matter of minutes, Ted's appearance was checked against descriptions in the database. Police also knew they had the key to the handcuffs they found at Debbie's car that belonged to the handcuffs that Carol had been wearing. They called Carol in to look at Ted in a lineup, and she wasted no time saying that it was the man who attacked her. Ted's photo was then scanned and sent to Seattle police and shown to witnesses in the Seattle student murders, and again, they had no trouble picking Ted out. Utah cops had enough to charge him with the kidnapping of Carol and they suspected he was behind a string of murders in both Utah and Washington. But they didn't have enough to charge him with those murders, not yet. Ted later managed to get his parents to pay his bail, and he was once again back on the streets, albeit followed everywhere he went. He called me for the first time in a while, sounding cheerful as always, saying he'd been mixed up in some criminal case he had nothing to do with. He asked me if I could talk to my old connections in the force and see what was going on. I presumed he was innocent. This was Ted, after all, a hero in my eyes, a man dedicated to public safety. When I was told Ted was being investigated for the murders of those young women, I could hardly believe my ears. "Ted?" I told him when I called. "They think you had something to do with those missing girls in Washington." He laughed down the line. "Everything's gonna turn out all right," he said. "If it doesn't, I guess you'll be seeing my face on TV." The next day, I was driving with my son and I heard on the radio, Theodore Robert Bundy, a former resident of Tacoma, has been charged with a series of brutal murders. I didn't hear anything from Ted for a couple months, until I received a letter he'd written from jail. He wrote, "My world is a cage." Philosophically, he added, "How many men before me have struggled to vainly describe the cruel metamorphosis that occurs in captivity?" It seems now he was an advocate for prisoners' rights. People, he said, had just been brought up on the wrong side of the tracks. He told me they just found a body that belonged to one of the missing girls in Washington. They had charged him with that and 2 Utah murders. "You know how ridiculous that is?" he wrote, telling me how much he missed Molly and his youngest brother. In another letter, Ted told me, "It's political. They've picked me out because of a misunderstanding with a girl I met at a mall here. They've somehow got me connected to a bunch of murders, but I'm pretty certain it's a conspiracy related to my having worked on the conservative campaign trail. It's a setup." He knew now the media was all over the fact that he'd worked in politics and was an advocate of women's rights. He asked me to put some money into his jail account, which I would later do. He also wrote a poem in the letter titled Days and Nights. It went, "This is no way to be. A man ought to be free. That man should be me." In another letter, he said men were forced to watch TV because there was nothing else to do. He called TV visual brain cancer. He wrote another poem talking about his newfound relationship with God. Part of it went, "The scriptures bring peace. They talk of release. They bring us to God. In here, that seems odd." Admittedly, Ted Bundy was not a very good poet. His name was now all over the TV. On certain web forums, some people talked of a conspiracy. I'm not sure if Ted had managed to somehow get his narrative out there. While most people were sympathetic toward the victims, some people said they had little compassion for such privileged girls. I thought that was a bit nasty, but such is life online. Ted even had a support group, a kind of fan club. His face was all over the internet. The media decried the fact that he had fans, talking about how this exposed misogyny in a society where his male fans were concerned and where females were concerned, and the media talked of self-hatred born from that male misogyny. Ted, said some of those newspapers, was the consequence of a positive masculinity movement. The underlying message was no man could be trusted. It was a good time to have a media business or a YouTube channel. I spoke to Liz one day. We met at a cafe. Sitting around the back where she could smoke, I swear, in a matter of 2 hours, she went through a whole 20-pack. She told me that Ted had also kept plaster of Paris at her house. At this point, everyone was now aware of the killer approaching women with casts on. She said he was never there at night when he stayed at her house. He'd come back and sleep all day, never telling her where he'd been. She said one night she woke up and he was under the covers with a torch looking at private parts. One night he asked to tie her up. She was reluctant but agreed in the end. She said as soon as she nodded her head, he went straight to where she kept her stockings. He knew where they were. When he tied her, everything was too tight. After he let her go, she joked and said she'd report him. He laughed back and said, "Don't do that and I'll break your neck." She said, "I'm not sure if he was kidding." I didn't know how to reply. Ted wrote me a few weeks later saying he was in the eye of a hurricane and that he felt like he was being used as a scapegoat for the anti-toxic masculinity movement. But the evidence was growing. More and more people came forward. They'd seen Ted at places where crimes had been committed. That day at Lake Sammamish, it turned out he'd been seen by 2 Republican Party officials. They had him in a video, in the distance at least. The girls he lied to about helping him with his video all came forward. Ted was, at the very least, a prowler and a kidnapper. For the cops, the problem was a lack of DNA evidence. Then another of the bodies was found, one that Ted had been back to visit. While he always wore gloves when he had his intimate time with the corpses, police found a strand of his hair nearby. He was finished. I decided not to help him anymore. I told Liz that she should do the same. We met for dinner one night. She showed me one of what she said were many love poems he'd sent her. "I send you a kiss. Deliver this body to hold. I sleep with you tonight, with words of love untold." "Liz," I said, "it's a bad poem, an awful poem. It's bad because Ted doesn't have any feelings. He's trying to manipulate you because he knows everyone else now thinks he's guilty." She just kind of shrugged. Ted had gotten to her. She started to cry about how she'd earlier abandoned him and told the cops about his weirdness. "I can't believe he still writes to me after what I've done to him," she said. I looked at her and I told her straight, "Liz, he is not who you think he is." Ted had done well to find such an insecure girlfriend. Now Ted's supporters were wearing t-shirts saying Bundy is a scapegoat. His many detractors used him to unfairly stigmatize men in general. People barely even talked about the victims. Politicians even used the crime to promote themselves. He wrote me a card for the new year, just saying, "What the hell, Happy New Year, love Ted." I stopped replying to his letters. Just before his court case, he wrote me again saying, "I have no animosity against you. I know you are essentially a good person. I wish you the best. Take care, Ted." Ted was essentially a bad person. He had a compulsion to kill and manipulate. I don't know why. I just know he was evil. And I know the greatest trick he ever played was making people believe his evil didn't exist. In some ways, I was also one of his victims, as were the thousands of people who stood outside the court and screamed at each other about whose fault he was, about who he represented in society. Ted would have loved to see those people fighting like that. Oh, how he admired himself for being a puppet master. He tried it in prison, the manipulation, the deceit, trying to divide people, but the prisoners soon saw through it. They knew what Ted was, so it didn't come as much of a surprise to anyone that he was beaten to death one day in the shower.
When asking the question of how to get away with murder, there's no better place to start than the case of Samuel Little, a man that could have killed 93 people in the U.S. over several decades. He died in 2020 aged 80, but before he bit the dust, he let his story be known. He said he started killing people in 1970, and he kept on killing without detection for over 4 decades. He was eventually arrested in 2012, but it wasn't until a few years later, when he started confessing to many more crimes, that he became known as one of the worst of the worst. He told the authorities in lurid detail what he'd done, and his stories added up. But how did a guy get away with killing for so long? Well, there are a few reasons in the case of Little. Firstly, he moved around a lot, killing in 19 different states. He might have had a criminal record as long as your arm, but all that movement made it hard to connect him to various murders. When a criminal moves a lot, various police departments might not be working together, which was certainly the case when he started killing in the 70s. But perhaps the main reason why he evaded capture for so long was that he killed people who might not have prompted the most rigorous investigations. Many of his victims were very poor, some were homeless, and many were addicted to drugs or selling their bodies on the streets. Some people he killed were unidentified, remaining Jane Does. There was a matter of race. When Little confessed, he made people take a long, hard think about race and class. Wealthy white girls and women he stayed far away from, knowing that this would elicit a meaningful response from the police. Little told the Washington Post, "I'm not going to go over there into the white neighborhood and pick out a little teenage girl." In a separate interview, he echoed that statement, saying, "I never killed no senators or governors or fancy New York journalists, nothing like that. I kill a journalist, it'll be all over the news the next day. I stayed in the ghettos." He was actually picked out in a photo lineup by a woman who'd gotten away from him, but the district attorney's office said they were not comfortable prosecuting a man when the only witnesses were prostitutes. In his own words, "They was broken homeless and they walked right into my spiderweb." There's a theory related to police work in murder which states there are less dead people. They're less dead because they were less alive, meaning they were the most vulnerable folks in the society whose lives, in terms of how the authorities looked at them, weren't as important as other people's lives. One academic put it like this: "A great deal less pressure is felt by the police when victims of a crime comes from the marginal elements." Just about all of Little's victims could be said to have been less dead. And because he moved around so much when picking his victims, this was why he wasn't caught for so long. But not all serial killers go for this type of victim, and certainly not all serial killers have a colorful rap sheet. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. Take the case of Ted Bundy. He was a good-looking, charming, well-educated man that was proud to say he worked in politics on election campaigns. He was liked by the people he worked with. He was also greatly admired by the woman he married and had no idea what he was up to in his spare time. What's even more shocking is one of his jobs was working as the director for the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. When he killed, and by God he killed a lot, he usually chose pretty middle-class young women, many of whom were studying at university. These people did not fit into that less dead category that we just talked about, but Bundy didn't fit the mold of a maniac either. For that reason, he could hide in plain sight. There's no way Little could have done such a thing. Killers often look for ideal victims, just as companies look for a target audience. Bundy was seen numerous times by people in places where women had gone missing.
People reported seeing a guy with his arm in a sling. If you didn't know, Bundy did this to make himself look more vulnerable and needy. Those people told the cops what he looked like, and later others would come forward and describe the man they had seen. The sketches looked just like him. The thing with Bundy was he was a psychopath. His narcissism made him think he was too clever for the cops, and he was able to use his so-called winning smile to gain people's trust. The authorities weren't exactly looking for a guy with a great job and a wife. He even once worked for the Department of Emergency Services and talked a bit about missing women. Part of his job was to look for women that he'd killed himself. He was basically armed with a kind of cloaking device based on society's biases, rather like what is depicted in the novel American Psycho. On top of that, they didn't have much forensic evidence to work with, and some of the bodies were missing. At one point, cops were looking for a guy named Ted since someone had given them that name. They had the description of his face and body, and they knew about the VW Beetle. One of his colleagues even called the cops and said, "I think Ted Bundy could be the man you're looking for." But then police received around 200 similar calls every day. Then, when the going got tough and bodies were being found, Bundy left the state. He started killing again, of course, but again, when different states are involved, it can be hard for police to link murders. There's an actual term for this called linkage blindness. Even an ex-girlfriend of his called the police and said she thought she had dated the killer. Her name was Elizabeth Kopfler, and it seems her story fell on deaf ears. It was only when the cops had computerized databases to work with that they realized that from the 26 names they had, one was Ted's. Later, when he was pulled over driving around Salt Lake City and his car was searched, police found these items: a ski mask, trash bags, handcuffs, a crowbar, lengths of rope, and an ice pick. That was pretty much the serial killer's starting kit. Bundy escaped from custody twice and killed again, but we won't go into that. In conclusion, he got away with it for so long for a few reasons. He just didn't fit the description of a killer. Moving across states created a linkage blindness, and of course DNA evidence wasn't available. While the cops did have an archaic database, Bundy might have been caught earlier if they had had a kind of tracking technology they had today. But sometimes police just do very bad work, as you'll now see. In 1979, in a suburb of Bradford in northern England, a policeman turned up at a house to interview its occupant. His name was Peter Sutcliffe, the man that would later become known as the Yorkshire Ripper. That cop had a sketch to go on provided by some of the women who had escaped the clutches of this maniac, and the guy he talked to that day over a cup of tea looked identical to the sketch. When the cop went back to the station to tell the chief about the man, the chief shouted back, "Anybody mentions photo fits to me again will be doing traffic for the rest of their service." That chief was following one line of investigation, which is a reason why some killers have gotten away with their crimes for so long. Sutcliffe was married to a teacher and lived in a house on a quiet suburban street. And so yet again, he wasn't what police immediately thought of when they looked at the bodies of women that had been torn apart. He was interviewed by the cops 9 times before he was eventually arrested, and he killed quite a few times in between those interviews. It's natural for cops and the public to think of some kind of monster when we hear about people being eviscerated down dark alleys. In the past, sometimes werewolves were blamed for such crimes, but more often than not, the killer looks and behaves just like you and me. Police know better now, but there is little doubt that a man who lives a very ordinary life might be the last person police look at. In this case of bad policing, you could say the cops had a one-track mind. First, they said the killer only chooses prostitutes as victims, even having the gall to call non-prostitutes normal women. Police at first said one of the attacks on a girl was not the same man because the killer only chooses prostitutes. She survived and gave the police a description of Sutcliffe. She also said he definitely had a strong Yorkshire accent, which, if you know English accents, is pretty unmistakable. Police dismissed her story as not linked to the serial killings. When they finally realized the guy kills indiscriminately, they called one of the victims the first innocent person. These were the kinds of people on the job. They had closed minds. They weren't the best investigators. They also worked with paper, not computers. They had so many files after years of investigations that they had to reinforce the floor where they were kept. That didn't help the investigation at all. They finally got a break when a banknote was found hidden in one of the victim's purses. Sutcliffe had given her the money before he killed her, and when cops looked at the numbers on that crisp note, they had a list of places where it could have been used to pay people. One was T and W.H. Clark Holdings, where Sutcliffe worked. He was even interviewed there by the police. Still, even with an entire Ripper squad looking for him, he killed again and again. What happened next is one of the biggest police bloopers of all time. They received a recorded message from a man claiming to be the killer, although this man didn't have a Yorkshire accent. The man speaking to the head of the investigation said, "I'm Jack. I see you're having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you're no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started."
Linguists who were hired said this accent is not from Yorkshire but Tyne and Wear in the northeast of England. They were right, and the cops were very, very wrong to pursue a line of investigation into this tape. They looked for the mysterious Jack rather than the Peter on their doorstep. Meanwhile, Peter kept on killing. The person who actually faked being the killer even called the police to say he lied, but for some reason they kept looking for Jack. The FBI's fairly new behavioral science unit went over to England and told the investigators, "You realize, of course, that the man on the tape is not the killer, don't you?" They said, "You're looking for a man with mental health issues who likely works as a driver." That theory was spot on. Then one of Sutcliffe's former friends wrote to the cops in Bradford. The anonymous letter marked priority number 1 went like this: "I have good reason to know the man you're looking for in the Ripper case. This man has dealings with prostitutes and always has had a thing about them. His name and address is Peter Sutcliffe, 5 Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford, Shipley. He said he was with Sutcliffe one night and he likely killed someone. For some reason, that letter was just filed and left alone. The guy even went to the police station the next day and told the cops again he was pretty sure the killer was Sutcliffe. The report of that meeting mysteriously vanished. Sutcliffe was eventually caught, but only after he was pulled over on a traffic stop. Even when he was in handcuffs, the ignorance of the authorities didn't stop. When he stood in court, a prosecutor said, while some of the victims were prostitutes, perhaps the saddest part of this case is that some were not. The last 6 attacks were on totally respectable women. As for what went wrong in the case, well, take your pick. The police were single-minded. They seemed to embrace a top-down structure in which newer cops could not criticize more experienced cops. They also likely discounted Sutcliffe as a possible perpetrator because of his normal home life. They followed false leads. They had way too much paperwork and dots didn't get connected. Those Yorkshire cops were behind the times when it came to understanding the minds of serial killers. Still, he didn't cross state lines and killed mostly close to where he lived. He should never have gotten away with it for so long. The British media rightly called the investigation stunningly mishandled. Sticking with Britain, let's have a look at the case of Dennis Nilsen, the serial killer that strangled boys and young men and then spent time watching TV with the corpses. This bespectacled man was well liked at work, where he held the role of executive officer in a civil service job. Prior to that, he'd been a soldier and even worked as a policeman. He was quiet and intelligent, so when he smelled of booze or took days off work to dismember and burn his decomposing victims, no one thought anything of it. He didn't just come across as normal, but so harmless that people felt a bit sorry for him. Nilsen drank heavily, and it was his astounding tolerance for alcohol that he used to subdue his victims. When he invited them around and plied them with booze, they collapsed in a drunken heap and he was just fine. Nonetheless, one guy survived Nilsen strangling him and he went to tell the cops. This is where the police again showed some amount of short-sightedness. They just dismissed the crime as a homosexual lover's tiff. This was the 80s when homophobia was rife among the English police forces. The cops, it seems, thought that what happened was consensual, and they didn't press any further when the man said he wasn't going to press charges. Another survivor of Nilsen didn't even report what happened to him for fear of being outed. A very similar thing happened in the US to a very similar kind of killer. Jeffrey Dahmer also enjoyed spending time with his dead victims, and he had a similar run-in with homophobic cops. Dahmer plied one of his victims with alcohol containing sleeping pills, after which he drilled a hole in the kid's head and injected hydrochloric acid. Like Nilsen, he had a thing about people leaving him. Dahmer wanted to create his own kind of obedient zombie. The kid eventually escaped, only for 3 women to find him in the street looking very confused and distraught. They called the cops, but when the police turned up, they didn't believe the women when they told them something was very wrong here. They believed Dahmer, though, when he arrived on the scene and told them they'd just fallen out. The police almost used the same words as the cops had done in the Nilsen case. They wrote it down as a lover's quarrel. Even though blood could be seen around the victim's backside, they helped walk the kid back to the apartment. One of the cops even noted how Dahmer's apartment smelled disgusting. That was because bodies were decomposing in there. It should also be said that Dahmer also had a criminal record involving sexual deviancy. Dahmer killed the teenager shortly after. With that in mind, we can come to the conclusion that some killers have evaded capture from time to time because of police discrimination. In both these cases, the cops either felt uncomfortable with homosexual men or had outlandish preconceptions in regard to what goes on in the gay community. In Dahmer's case, he certainly should have been on the police radar. He had a record and after arrests had been called a sociopath with sadistic tendencies by psychiatrists. They also said this man will strike again. He did, but one drugged man survived the ordeal. Dahmer was arrested yet again, with the psychiatrist this time saying he was seriously disturbed, impulsive, and dangerous. Still, Dahmer went back to the streets. He was only caught after one of his victims got away, still in handcuffs, and flagged down a cop car. As for Dennis Nilsen, he didn't have a history of criminality, and unlike Dahmer, from the outside he looked like a respectable office worker who just liked to spend a lot of time alone in his quiet, leafy London suburb house. It did seem, though, that the police turned a blind eye when it seemed obvious that Nilsen had seriously assaulted someone. We should also point out, in fairness to the cops, Nilsen did a pretty good job at disposing of bodies, at the start at least. Because the cops in London and elsewhere for that matter have been accused of such prejudice, they might at times have kept their distance. This could lead to negligence, and such stigmatization of the gay community could lead to serial killers getting away with crimes. We can't stress enough that keeping an open mind is very important where serial killers are concerned. Nilsen would likely have not been caught if he hadn't made a very big mistake. After being forced to move and not having a garden anymore to burn bodies, he had to make do with a flat to dispose of his victims. He did his best to chop them up and liquefy them, but what he shoved down the drain led to some blockages. He was actually one of the tenants that called the landlord and said something had to be done about those blockages. When some workers opened the drains, they discovered something horrible. What looked and smelled like bits of rotting flesh. Nilsen actually went outside and told the guys it was likely discarded KFC. There was no brilliant or particularly bad police work after that. After finding a head, arms, feet, and other body parts in his flat, Nilsen turned to the cops and said, "It's a long story. Goes back a long time. I'll tell you everything. I want to get it off my chest." He killed 12 to 15 people over a 5-year period, and as the English might say, the police didn't have the foggiest. Now, for the last one. What if there's a serial killer out there that is the worst you could possibly imagine, and yet police still haven't uncovered this crime? It's very possible. Richard Cottingham, aka the New York Ripper, is currently serving time in prison in New Jersey. Police know he definitely killed 11 people, most of them vulnerable young women who he brutally tortured before killing. He started in 1967, but wasn't arrested until 1980. Since he's been in prison, he's had a change of heart at times and admitted to more murders. In fact, he said he killed in the region of 100 people. He's spoken about it to the serial killer historian Peter Vronsky, but sometimes he says he can't recall what he did with some of the victims or their body parts. Cottingham was another family guy that no one ever expected of killing people. Never mind doing the atrocious things he did to his victims. He held down a very good job as a computer operator at an insurance company, and he was adored by his 3 kids. He was also not on the police radar when he was finally arrested. That happened because he was confident enough to try and kill a girl at the exact same hotel he'd mutilated and killed another girl just weeks earlier. When the staff thought they'd heard screams, they called the police, their minds still traumatized by what happened 18 days earlier. The question is, though, could this man be the most prolific serial killer ever in the US, and the cops just don't know about it? Well, as Vronsky points out in his books, there are massive gaps between his first murder and when he was caught. Cottingham said he never stopped killing in those 13 years, but he was only convicted of just a handful of murders. By the way, Vronsky was inspired to start writing about serial killers after bumping into Cottingham in a hotel after he just dismembered 2 women. When Cottingham got out of the elevator, his bag hit Vronsky's knees. It was heavy and it hurt. That's because there were 2 heads and 2 pairs of hands in that bag. In one of his books, Vronsky writes of the time when Cottingham was on the loose. On 8th Avenue north of West 42nd Street, there were so many hookers that the NYPD put up wooden barricades along the sidewalks to keep them and their pimps from spilling off the sidewalks onto the avenue and blocking traffic. At the time, the city was awash with crime, and there was in the region of 40,000 prostitutes working there. When Cottingham wasn't showing off his computer skills in his Manhattan job, he was frequenting a red light district, which was also an analog porn hub nicknamed The Deuce. Women and girls went missing a lot. In 1974, Marianne Pryor, age 17, and Lorianne Kelly, age 16, were last seen at a bus stop in the area. Their naked bodies were found later behind a parking lot. It wasn't until April 2021 that detectives, with the help of Vronsky, finally solved the case. Cottingham had savagely killed them both. Other cold cases were also solved after Cottingham's confessions. But did he kill 100 people? That's the riddle Detective Robert Anzalotti tried to solve for a long time. Over the years, he visited Cottingham, each time building up a kind of rapport to make him open up about what he'd done. One day, Cottingham just said, "I'm going to give you one." He described a murder he committed, saying things only the killer would have known. Anzalotti told the New York Times in 2021 he remembers certain aspects of a person. One would remind him of a TV actress. Look her up, she looks like her. Others he remembered from a haircut. Unfortunately, since Cottingham didn't know his victims at all, he couldn't recall any names. Detectives are still working on many cases, so perhaps the extent of Cottingham's crimes will one day become known. He's getting old, though, and according to Anzalotti, getting anything out of him is hard. I think sometimes he grapples with his own gruesomeness back then, Anzalotti said. Richard Cottingham might be in prison, but it seems in some respects he's still getting away with murder.